He was supposed to be a stranger, a neighbor she barely spoke to beyond polite nods in the hallway. But when Lila Bennett knocked on Ethan Brooks' door on Christmas Eve and asked him to pretend to be her boyfriend in front of her entire family, neither of them understood what they were really starting. What began as a desperate lie to dodge an ex-boyfriend became something far more dangerous. Because somewhere between the fake smiles and rehearsed touches, the pretending stopped. And the truth? The truth was something neither of them was ready for. If you want to see how one night changed everything, stay with this story until the very end. Drop a like and comment the name of your city so I can see just how far this story travels. The radiator in apartment 4B had been making that sound again. Not quite a clang, not quite a whistle. Something in between, like the building itself was groaning under the weight of another Chicago winter. Ethan Brooks had stopped noticing it months ago, the way you stop noticing a scar after enough time passes. It was just part of the landscape now, part of the apartment, part of the quiet. He stood at the kitchen counter with a fork in one hand and a microwave dinner balanced on the other, the plastic film still half peeled, steam curling up toward the ceiling. Salisbury steak. He didn't even like Salisbury steak, but the grocery run he'd planned for that afternoon had been derailed by a last-minute daycare closing, something about a pipe bursting in the building. And he'd spent the day chasing a 4-year-old around the apartment instead, building block towers and negotiating over juice boxes. Now Sophie was asleep. Had been for almost 40 minutes. He'd read her the same picture book 3 times because she kept saying "again, Daddy," in that voice he couldn't say no to, and when she'd finally drifted off with her stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin, he'd stood in her doorway for a long time, just watching her breathe. That was the thing about being a single father that nobody warned you about. It wasn't the exhaustion, though there was plenty of that. It wasn't the logistics, the daycare pickups, the doctor's appointments, the endless laundry. It was the silence that came after. The moment when the apartment went still and you realized there was no one to turn to and say, "She said the funniest thing today." No one to share the small, ordinary victories with. No one to sit beside on the couch and just exist with. Ethan set the microwave dinner on the counter and stared at it. Merry Christmas Eve. He was 32 years old. He had a stable job as a structural engineer at a mid-sized firm downtown. He had a daughter who thought he was the greatest person alive, which was more than most people could say. He had a roof over his head, food on the table, even if it was cardboard-tasting Salisbury steak, and his health. By any reasonable measure, he was doing fine. But fine had a way of feeling hollow on nights like this. He pulled his phone from his back pocket and scrolled through it without purpose. A few texts from coworkers wishing him happy holidays. A Facebook memory from 3 years ago. Him and Rebecca at some restaurant, both of them smiling too hard. The way couples smile when they're already falling apart but haven't admitted it yet. He swiped past it quickly. Rebecca, Sophie's mother. The woman who'd looked him in the eye 14 months ago and said, "I love you, but I can't do this anymore," and walked out of the apartment with 2 suitcases and a yoga mat. She'd moved to Portland. She sent Sophie birthday cards. She called on Sundays sometimes. She was not a villain in this story. Ethan had made peace with that, or was trying to, but she was also not here. And on Christmas Eve, that absence had a weight to it that pressed down on his chest like something physical. He dropped the fork into the sink and leaned against the counter. The apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that opened into a living area just big enough for a couch and a TV stand. He'd put up a Christmas tree, a 4-foot artificial thing he'd bought at the drugstore, because Sophie had seen one at daycare and asked for it. He'd strung lights on it and let her hang ornaments wherever she wanted, which meant they were all clustered on the bottom 18 inches. It looked ridiculous. It was the best tree he'd ever had. A knock came at the door. Ethan frowned. It was almost 8 o'clock on Christmas Eve. He wasn't expecting anyone. His parents lived in Michigan, and they'd exchanged the obligatory phone call that morning, 10 minutes of his mother asking if he was eating enough, and his father making awkward comments about the Bears' season. His sister hadn't called at all, but that was its own story. He crossed to the door and opened it. Lila Bennett stood in the hallway wearing a red sweater with a reindeer on it that was either deeply ironic or completely sincere. With Lila, you could never quite tell. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy knot, and she was holding a foil-covered dish in both hands. She was grinning, which was more or less her default state. In the 9 months Ethan had lived in this building, he'd never once seen Lila Bennett without some version of that grin. "Hey, neighbor," she said. "Hey, you look thrilled. I'm holding a Salisbury steak." She peered past him into the apartment. "By yourself?" "Sophie's asleep. And you're spending Christmas Eve eating a microwave dinner alone." She said it as a statement, not a question. There was no judgment in her voice, which somehow made it worse. "It's not that bad," Ethan said. Lila raised her eyebrows. "Okay, it's pretty bad." She laughed, that loud, unguarded laugh that carried through walls. Ethan had heard it through the shared wall between their apartments more times than he could count. Late at night, usually. Lila on the phone with someone, cracking up at something, filling her apartment with noise and life in a way that made his own silence feel even larger. "Come to my parents' house," she said. "What?" "My family does Christmas Eve dinner. It's a whole thing. My mom cooks enough food for a small army. My dad argues about football. My aunt drinks too much wine and starts telling embarrassing stories. It's chaotic and loud, and there's way too much food. You should come." Ethan leaned against the doorframe. "Lila, that's really nice, but I can't just show up at your family's Christmas dinner." "Why not?" "Because I'm a stranger to them." "You're not a stranger. You're my neighbor." "That's basically a stranger." "Ethan." She shifted the dish to one hip and fixed him with a look that was part warmth, part stubbornness. "You've been alone in this apartment every night for the past 2 weeks. I hear you through the wall. I hear the TV going at midnight. I hear you pacing around at 2 in the morning. I'm not judging. I'm just... Look, nobody should eat Salisbury steak alone on Christmas Eve. It's depressing. You can hear me pacing? These walls are thin. I can hear you sigh." He almost smiled. Almost. "I appreciate the offer, really, but Sophie's asleep and I can't just leave her and... Bring her. My mom loves kids. She'll lose her mind over Sophie." "Lila..." "Ethan, I'm not leaving this hallway until you say yes. I will stand here all night. I brought this pie as a bribe." She lifted the foil-covered dish. "It's pecan. My mom's recipe. You haven't lived until you've had this pie." He looked at her. She looked back at him. The hallway was drafty and cold, and somewhere down the corridor someone's apartment was playing Christmas music. Something old and scratchy, Bing Crosby maybe. And Lila was standing there with pie and that grin and a red reindeer sweater, and Ethan felt something shift in his chest. Not attraction exactly. Or not only that, something simpler. The realization that someone had noticed him. Someone had seen the closed door and the dark windows and the blue light of a television, and had thought, "I should knock." "There's something you should probably know first," Lila said. And just like that, the warmth cooled a degree. "What?" She bit her lower lip. The grin faltered, just for a second. "So here's the thing. My family thinks... Okay, don't freak out. But my family kind of thinks you're my boyfriend." Ethan stared at her. "Before you say anything, your family thinks I'm your boyfriend. It's not as bad as it sounds." "How is that not as bad as it sounds?" Lila took a breath. "Okay, so, you know how I mentioned my ex, Trevor? We dated for 2 years. It doesn't matter. The point is, we broke up 6 months ago, and my mom has been relentless about it. Every phone call, every text. Have you met someone new? You're 30, Lila. Your cousin Jennifer just got engaged. It's nonstop. So a few weeks ago, I may have mentioned that I was seeing someone. Someone being me. Someone being the guy next door who's tall and has nice eyes and works in engineering. I didn't use your name, but I may have described you with some specificity." Ethan pinched the bridge of his nose. "Lila..." I know, it was stupid, but it got my mom off my back, and I figured it was harmless because she lives 40 minutes away, and she'd never meet you, except then she invited me for Christmas Eve and said, 'Bring that nice engineer boy.' And I panicked. So your plan is to bring me to your family's house and have me pretend to be your boyfriend. When you say it like that, it sounds insane. It is insane. It's one evening, A few hours, tops. You eat some food, you smile at my parents, we leave. Nobody gets hurt. Except me. When your father finds out I'm a fraud and throws me into a snowbank. Lila snorted. My father is 5'7" and has a bad knee. You'll be fine. Ethan looked back into his apartment. The microwave dinner sat on the counter, getting cold. The Christmas tree glowed in the corner, all its ornaments bunched at the bottom. Sophie's bedroom door was closed. He could hear the faint sound of her nightlight, the one that played ocean waves, humming through the wall. Why me? He asked. Lila tilted her head. What do you mean? Why not just tell your family the truth, or bring an actual boyfriend, or make one up entirely? Because they'd see through a lie in 5 seconds. My mom's like a human polygraph, but you're real. You live next door, you're a single dad with a great kid. You're not some random guy I pulled off the street. And honestly, she paused. Something crossed her face, something more vulnerable than the grin usually allowed. Trevor is going to be there. My aunt invited him because she doesn't believe in taking sides in breakups, which is a whole other issue. And I really don't want to walk in there alone and have him see me alone and think he was right. Right about what? That I can't do better than him. The hallway went quiet. Down the corridor, Bing Crosby had stopped singing. The draft pushed cold air between them. Lila stood there holding her pie, and for the first time since Ethan had known her, she didn't look cheerful. She looked tired. She looked like someone who'd been carrying something heavy and smiling through it. He knew what that felt like. One evening, he said. Her face changed. Really? A few hours. I eat some food. I smile at your parents. We leave. Ethan, but I need you to brief me. I'm not walking in there blind. What does your family know? What have you told them? Do we have a cover story? How long have we supposedly been dating? I need details. Lila's grin came back, full force. I will give you so many details. You're going to know my family better than I do. And I need to wake Sophie up and get her dressed, which means she's going to be cranky, which means you're dealing with a cranky 4-year-old for the rest of the night. I love cranky 4-year-olds. No one loves cranky 4-year-olds. I'll win her over. Watch me. He shook his head, already regretting it, already feeling the absurdity of the situation settling into his bones. But he also felt something else, a flicker of something that might have been anticipation. Or maybe it was just the relief of not eating Salisbury steak alone. Give me 20 minutes, he said. Take 30. I'll go change into something that doesn't have pie on it. She glanced down at her sweater, where a smear of pecan filling had left a dark streak across the reindeer's face. Also, one more thing. What? You should probably know my mom's name. It's Diane, and she's going to hug you the second you walk through the door, so just be ready for that. She turned and walked down the hallway toward her apartment, and Ethan stood in his doorway, watching her go, wondering what exactly he'd just agreed to. He closed the door and leaned against it. This is a terrible idea, he said to the empty apartment. The radiator clanged in agreement. Cha. Waking Sophie was easier than expected. She opened her eyes, saw him leaning over her bed, and said, Is it Christmas? Not yet, sweetheart. We're going to a party. A party? She sat up, her hair a mess of dark curls, her rabbit clutched to her chest. With cake? Probably with cake. And presents? Maybe. I'm not sure. But there'll be food and people, and I want to wear my princess dress. It's cold outside. How about the princess dress over your warm leggings? She considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice weighing a landmark case. Okay, she said finally, but I'm bringing Rabbit. Rabbit can come. He got her dressed, the purple princess dress over black leggings, a heavy coat, her snow boots with the Velcro straps, and she chattered the entire time, her crankiness dissolving into the electric excitement of a 4-year-old who'd been told there was a party. By the time they stepped into the hallway, she was practically vibrating. Lila was waiting by her door. She'd changed into a dark green dress and a pair of boots, her hair down now, falling past her shoulders. She'd put on lipstick. She looked... Ethan caught himself noticing and stopped. Well, look at you, Lila said, crouching down to Sophie's level. Is that a princess dress? Sophie nodded solemnly. I'm a princess. You're the most beautiful princess I've ever seen. And who's this? She pointed at the stuffed rabbit. Rabbit. Hi, Rabbit. I'm Lila. Sophie studied Lila with the frank, appraising stare that only small children can get away with. You're pretty, she announced. Lila pressed her hand to her chest. That's the nicest thing anyone said to me all week. They took Lila's car, a 10-year-old Honda with a cracked dashboard and an air freshener shaped like a pine tree. The drive to her parents' house took 45 minutes, most of it on the expressway, the city falling away into the suburbs, snow coming down in fat, lazy flakes that caught the headlights and turned them into streaks of white. Sophie fell asleep in the back seat within 10 minutes, her head tilted against the car seat, Rabbit in her lap. Okay, Lila said, keeping her voice low. Crash course. Ready? Ready. We've been dating for 3 months. We met in the hallway. Which is technically true. You asked me out first. Sorry, but my mom would expect that. We've been taking it slow because of Sophie, which buys us cover for why they haven't met you before. What do I do for a living? You're an engineer, which you actually are, so that's easy. Just talk about bridges or buildings or whatever it is you do. I design structural systems for commercial buildings. See? You don't even have to lie about that part. My dad will eat it up. He's a retired contractor. He loves that stuff. What should I know about your family? Lila drummed her fingers on the steering wheel. My mom, Diane. She's warm but intense. She'll ask you 100 questions and she'll remember every answer, so don't contradict yourself. My dad, frank, quiet, drinks beer, watches whatever game is on. He'll like you if you're not phony. He hates phony. My sister, Maya. She's 26, she's a grad student. She's going to give you a hard time because that's what she does. My Aunt Carol. She's my mom's sister. She's the one who invited Trevor, and she's going to be 3 glasses of wine deep by the time we get there. And Trevor. Lila's jaw tightened just slightly. Trevor Hayes. We dated for 2 years. He's a real estate developer. He's charming, he's good-looking, and he knows it. He's the kind of guy who shakes your hand and squeezes too hard. He's going to try to get under your skin. Don't let him. Why did you break up? She was quiet for a moment. The wipers dragged across the windshield. Snow was sticking to the roads now, and she slowed the car, leaning forward slightly. He wasn't mean, she said finally. That would have been easier, actually. If he'd been mean, I could have just left and never looked back. But he was controlling, in these small ways that didn't seem like a big deal at first. He'd tell me what to order at restaurants. He'd pick out my clothes for events. He had opinions about my friends, which ones were good influences, which ones weren't. And if I pushed back, he'd get this look, like I was being ridiculous, like I was making a problem out of nothing. After 2 years, I woke up one morning and realized I didn't know what I actually liked anymore. Everything I wore, everything I ate, every show I watched, it was all filtered through what Trevor would think about it. So I left. Ethan looked at her. In the glow of the dashboard lights, her face was sharp and serious, the cheerfulness stripped away, and he realized he'd been wrong about her. He'd assumed the grin was her whole personality, the bubbly neighbor, the woman who laughed too loud and talked to everyone in the building. But there were layers under that, things she'd carried and put down and picked up again. I'm sorry, he said. Don't be. It was the best decision I ever made. I just hate that he's going to be there tonight, acting like we're old friends, like nothing happened. And my aunt's going to keep pushing us together because she thinks we were such a cute couple. And my mom's going to try to keep the peace, and the whole thing is going to be a mess. Unless you walk in with a boyfriend. Unless I walk in with a boyfriend. She glanced at him. You sure you're okay with this? Ask me again in 3 hours. The house was a modest 2-story in Naperville with a brick facade and a lawn covered in snow. Christmas lights lined the gutters, the multicolored kind, not the tasteful white ones. And a plastic Santa stood in the yard, slightly tilted, like he'd had a rough night. Cars were parked along the curb, and Ethan could see figures moving behind the curtained windows, hear the muffled sound of music and voices. He got Sophie out of the car seat. She was groggy but awake, blinking at the lights with wide eyes. Daddy, it's pretty, she whispered. Yeah, it is. Lila came around the car and stood beside them. She looked at the house, and Ethan saw her take a breath, the kind you take before jumping off a diving board. "Ready?" she asked. "Are you?" "Not even a little." They walked up the path together, Sophie on Ethan's hip, rabbit dangling from her fist. Lila reached for Ethan's free hand and took it, and the contact surprised him. Her fingers were cold from the walk, and she laced them through his with a familiarity that felt both practiced and genuine. "Sorry," she murmured. "We should look natural." "Right, natural." She rang the doorbell. The door flew open so fast Ethan suspected Diane Bennett had been standing behind it. She was a small woman with Lila's dark hair and sharp features, wearing an apron dusted with flour, and she made a sound when she saw them. A high, joyful sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a squeal. "You're here, Frank! They're here! Oh, come in, come in! Don't stand in the cold! And this must be Ethan!" She pulled him into a hug before he could react, one arm around his neck, the other somehow navigating around Sophie, who stared at this strange woman with the wide, suspicious eyes of a child meeting a hugger. "Lila's told us so much about you. And who is this angel?" "This is my daughter, Sophie," Ethan said. "Sophie! What a beautiful name! And that dress, are you a princess?" Sophie, who had been on the verge of burying her face in Ethan's shoulder, straightened up. "Yes," she said with dignity. "I'm a princess." "Well, of course you are. Come in, princess. I just made cookies." That was all it took. Sophie squirmed out of Ethan's arms and followed Diane into the house like she'd known her for years, and Ethan stood in the entryway with his coat still on, watching his daughter disappear into a stranger's kitchen. "Told you," Lila whispered. The house was warm and loud and smelled like cinnamon and roasting meat. The living room was crowded, a dozen people at least, draped across sofas and chairs and leaning against walls, holding plates of food and glasses of wine. A tree stood in the corner, a real one, massive, decorated with ornaments that were clearly homemade, popsicle stick stars and glitter-covered pine cones, and a lopsided angel at the top. Music was playing from somewhere, something jazzy and low. Lila's hand was still in his. "Let me introduce you," she said. What followed was a blur of names and faces and handshakes. Frank Bennett, Lila's father, a compact man with a gray beard and a firm grip who looked Ethan in the eye and said, "Engineer, huh? Structural?" And when Ethan said yes, he nodded once, like Ethan had passed a test. Maya, Lila's younger sister, sharp-eyed, a glass of red wine already in her hand, who looked at Ethan the way a detective looks at a suspect and said, "So you're the neighbor," with an emphasis that made the word sound like an accusation. Aunt Carol, red-cheeked and jovial, who told Ethan he was much more handsome than the last one, and then stage-whispered to Lila, "Keep this one, honey." Ethan smiled. He shook hands. He answered questions about his job and his daughter and how he liked the building, and he was surprised to find that it wasn't hard. Not the pretending, the being there. The noise, the warmth. The way someone kept refilling his plate without asking, the way Frank pulled him into a conversation about load-bearing walls and building codes, the way Sophie had somehow ended up in Diane's lap in the kitchen, covered in cookie flour, giggling. He hadn't been in a house like this in years, hadn't been around a family that functioned this way, messy and loud and generous. His own family had never been like this. His parents loved him, he knew that, but their love was the quiet, careful kind that stayed in its lane, that didn't reach across tables or pull you into hugs or make sounds of pure joy when you walked through the door. He was standing by the fireplace, holding a plate of food he didn't remember being given, when Lila appeared beside him. "You're doing great," she said, low enough that only he could hear. "I'm eating my third helping of your mom's mashed potatoes. She's going to adopt you. I might let her." Lila smiled, and it was different from her usual grin, smaller, more private. She touched his arm, and he knew it was for show, for anyone who might be watching, but it didn't feel like show. It felt easy. It felt like something that had always been there. "My sister thinks you're suspicious," Lila said. "Your sister is right. She keeps asking me how we met, trying to catch me in a lie." "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That we live next door to each other, that you asked me out, that we've been taking it slow." "And she bought it?" She's working on her second glass of wine. Give it another hour and she'll be your biggest fan. Across the room, the front door opened. Cold air rushed in, and with it came a man, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal overcoat and a smile that looked like it had been designed by a marketing team. He had the kind of jaw that belonged on a magazine cover, and the kind of confidence that filled a room just by entering it. Trevor Hayes. Ethan knew it before Lila said anything. He knew it from the way her hand tightened on his arm, from the way her spine straightened, from the way the whole room seemed to recalibrate around this new presence. Aunt Carol let out a delighted, "Trevor!" and several people moved to greet him, and Trevor worked the room with the ease of a man who'd done it 100 times. Handshakes, hugs, that laugh, that smile, all of it performed with the polished certainty of someone who knew exactly how he was being perceived. His eyes found Lila. Then they found Ethan. Then they found Lila's hand on Ethan's arm. Something shifted in Trevor's expression. It was fast, gone in a blink, but Ethan caught it. A flicker of surprise, then assessment, then something harder, something territorial. Trevor crossed the room. "Lila," he said, and he leaned in to kiss her cheek, a presumptuous gesture that Lila accepted with a stiffness only Ethan noticed. "Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas, Trevor. And you must be the new boyfriend." Trevor extended his hand to Ethan. The handshake was exactly what Lila had predicted. Firm to the point of aggression, held a beat too long. Trevor Hayes. Ethan Brooks. "Ethan. Good to meet you. Lila's told me nothing about you, so I guess we're starting from scratch." He said it with a laugh, like it was a joke, but his eyes weren't laughing. "Not much to tell," Ethan said. "I live next door. I build things for a living." "Build things? That's great. What kind of things?" "Buildings, structures. Like houses? Like hospitals, office towers, a parking garage in Schaumburg that I'm not particularly proud of." Trevor's smile didn't waver. "Interesting. I'm in real estate development myself, commercial side. We probably know some of the same people." "Probably." There was a pause. The kind of pause that felt like two dogs circling each other. "So how long have you two been together?" Trevor asked, turning his attention back to Lila. "A few months," Lila said. "A few months? That's fast. You don't waste time." He said it to Lila, but he was looking at Ethan. "Then again, you always did know what you wanted." "She does," Ethan said. It came out before he could filter it, and it was sharper than he'd intended. Trevor's eyebrows rose. That smile again, the one that wasn't quite a smile. "Easy, buddy, just making conversation." "Trevor," Diane appeared between them, a strategic interruption that suggested she'd been watching. "Can I get you a plate? There's plenty of food." "Diane, you're a saint. I'd love a plate." He allowed himself to be steered away and Lila exhaled. "You okay?" Ethan asked. "Fine, he does that. He walks into a room and suddenly everything is about him. It's exhausting." The handshake was a nice touch. "I think he was trying to break my fingers." "He does that to everyone. It's his thing." "It's a terrible thing." She laughed, quiet and grateful, and leaned into him slightly. The contact was warm. The fireplace crackled behind them. "Thank you for being here," she said. "Thank your mom's mashed potatoes. They're the real reason I came." The evening rolled on, and Ethan found himself settling into it in a way he hadn't expected. He sat at the dining table between Lila and Frank, eating food that was aggressively homemade. A ham that Frank had smoked himself, green bean casserole, cornbread, 3 kinds of pie. And listening to stories about Lila's childhood that made her groan and hide her face in her hands. The time she'd tried to build a treehouse in the backyard, and it had collapsed in the first rainstorm. The school play where she'd forgotten her one line and stood on stage in silence for 30 seconds. The phase where she'd insisted on wearing cowboy boots to every occasion, including a family wedding. She wore them with a flower girl dress, Diane said, laughing until tears formed. The photographer was horrified. "Mom? What?" It was adorable. It was traumatic. Sophie, who had been perched on Diane's lap for most of the evening, was now on the floor by the tree, playing with Maya, who had apparently abandoned her suspicion in favor of building a block tower that Sophie kept gleefully knocking over. Ethan watched them. He watched Sophie laugh, that full-body laugh where she threw her head back and her whole face scrunched up, and something ached in his chest. Not pain, exactly. Something closer to recognition. This was what he wanted for her. This noise. This chaos. This warmth. "She's a great kid," Frank said, following Ethan's gaze. "She is. Raising her on your own?" Ethan nodded. He'd been waiting for this question, dreading it, but Frank asked it the way he did everything, direct, matter-of-fact, without pity. "That's hard work," Frank said. "I raised 2 girls and I had Diane. Can't imagine doing it solo." "You figure it out," Ethan said. "You don't really have a choice." Frank took a sip of his beer. "You know what I learned? You don't have to do it alone. It's not weakness to let people help. It's smart." He paused. "My daughter's a good person. She's got a big heart. Maybe too big sometimes. Gets her in trouble." Ethan looked at him. Frank was staring at the television, where a football game was on mute, but his words carried weight that had nothing to do with the screen. "I know," Ethan said. "Good." Frank nodded once. "Good." Across the room, Trevor was holding court, talking about some development project, gesturing expansively, his audience a cluster of relatives who seemed impressed by the numbers he was throwing around. But Ethan noticed that his eyes kept drifting toward Lila, toward Ethan, toward the space between them. Later in the kitchen, Ethan was refilling his water glass when Trevor appeared beside him. "So," Trevor said, leaning against the counter. He had the casual posture of a man who was never casual. "You're the neighbor." "That's me?" "Must be convenient. Dating someone who lives right next door. No commute." He chuckled at his own joke. "It has its advantages." "I bet. Lila's a catch. I don't have to tell you that." He paused. "She's also complicated. You learned that yet?" Ethan set down his glass. "Everybody's complicated." "Sure. But Lila, she doesn't always know what she wants. She'll tell you she does, but give it 6 months and she'll be second-guessing everything. She did it with me. She'll do it with you." "That sounds like your problem, not hers." Trevor's smile thinned. "Friendly advice, man. Take it or leave it." "I'll leave it." They looked at each other. The kitchen was bright and warm, the sounds of the party drifting in from the other room, and in that fluorescent light, Ethan could see the thing behind Trevor's charm. The insecurity, the need to control the narrative, the inability to accept that someone had walked away from him and not looked back. "She's doing well," Ethan said. "It wasn't planned, it just came out." "What?" "Lila. She's doing well, she's happy. Whatever you're hoping to accomplish tonight, the handshakes, the subtle digs, the friendly advice, it's not going to work. She moved on. Maybe you should too." Trevor's jaw tightened. For a moment, the mask slipped entirely, and Ethan saw something raw underneath. Not anger, but loss. The look of a man standing in a house where he used to belong, watching someone else stand where he used to stand. Then the mask came back. "Like I said, take it or leave it." He pushed off the counter and walked out of the kitchen, and Ethan stood there alone, his heart beating faster than it should have been. It shouldn't have felt personal. It was a performance, a favor for a neighbor. But something about the way Trevor talked about Lila, dismissive and possessive at the same time, had hit a nerve that Ethan didn't know was exposed. He found Lila on the back porch, standing under the overhang, watching the snow fall into the yard. She had her arms wrapped around herself, and she turned when she heard the door. "Hey," she said, "you survived the kitchen." "Had a chat with Trevor." Her face changed. "What did he say?" "Nothing worth repeating." "Ethan." "He told me you were complicated. I told him everyone's complicated. He told me you don't know what you want. I told him that sounded like his problem." Lila stared at him, then she laughed. Not the bright, performative laugh, but something deeper, realer. A laugh that came from a place of relief. "You said that to his face?" "I was feeling bold. Your dad's beer might have had something to do with it." "I could kiss you right now." The words hung in the cold air between them. Lila's eyes widened slightly, like she'd surprised herself. She started to backtrack. I mean, not I just meant, but Ethan held up a hand. I know what you meant. Right, right. They stood on the porch, breath visible in the cold snow falling around them, and something passed between them that neither could name. Not a spark. That was too neat, too Hollywood. It was more like a recognition, a quiet understanding that whatever this had started as, it was becoming something else. We should go back inside, Lila said. We should. Neither of them moved. Your dad told me I should let people help me, Ethan said. He says that to everyone. He was talking about you. I know. She looked at the snow. He says I have a big heart and it gets me in trouble. Does it? Always? She turned back to him. Is it working? Is what working? The big heart. Is it getting me in trouble right now? Ethan looked at her. This woman he'd known for 9 months and hadn't known at all, standing on her parents' porch in the snow, asking him a question that had nothing to do with the words she was using. Yeah, he said. I think it might be. From inside the house, Diane's voice called out, something about dessert, about pie, about getting in here before Frank ate everything, and the moment broke. Lila smiled, softer this time, and reached for the door. Come on, boyfriend, she said. We've got a performance to finish. He followed her inside, and the warmth wrapped around them both. And somewhere in the living room, Sophie was laughing, and the tree was glowing, and the snow was falling, and Ethan Brooks, for the first time in longer than he could remember, didn't feel alone. The pie was pecan, and it was extraordinary, and Ethan ate 2 slices because Diane kept pushing the dish toward him with a look that made refusal feel like a federal offense. Sophie had fallen asleep again, this time on the living room carpet, curled against a throw pillow someone had placed under her head, rabbit tucked into the crook of her arm. Maya had draped a blanket over her at some point, and now Sophie lay there like a small, peaceful island in the middle of the party's noise, completely unbothered by the laughter and clinking glasses happening around her. Ethan kept looking at her from across the room. He kept thinking about how easily she'd settled in, how she'd let Diane hold her, let Maya build towers with her, let this family of strangers wrap around her like she'd always been part of it. Kids were like that, he supposed. They didn't carry the same weight of suspicion that adults did. They didn't interrogate kindness. They just accepted it. He envied that. The party was winding down. Aunt Carol had progressed to her 4th glass of wine and was now telling a long, winding story about a vacation in Cancun that seemed to have no point and no ending. Frank had retreated to his recliner, half watching a basketball game with the volume low. A few relatives were gathering coats, saying goodbyes, moving through the house in that slow, reluctant way people leave places where they've been warm and fed. Trevor was still there. He'd positioned himself at the dining table talking to one of Lila's cousins, a young guy named Dean who seemed impressed by everything Trevor said, nodding along like a student at a lecture. Trevor was telling some story about a property deal, throwing around numbers, dropping names, performing that particular brand of confidence that relied on other people's admiration to sustain itself. But every few minutes, his gaze drifted across the room, finding Lila, finding Ethan, measuring the distance between them. Lila was helping Diane clear dishes in the kitchen, and Ethan could hear them through the doorway. The clatter of plates, the rush of water, their voices low and intertwined. He caught fragments. He seems wonderful, Diane was saying. Mom, don't. Don't what? I'm not allowed to have an opinion. You're allowed to have an opinion. You're not allowed to start planning a wedding. Who said anything about a wedding? I said he seems wonderful. That's a statement of fact, not a proposal. You're using your wedding voice. I don't have a wedding voice. You absolutely have a wedding voice. You're using it right now. Ethan smiled into his water glass. There was something familiar about the rhythm of their conversation. The push and pull, the exasperation laced with affection. It reminded him of arguments he used to have with his own mother, before the distance between them had grown into something harder to name. He hadn't called home in 3 weeks. His mother had left 2 voicemails and a text that said, "Just checking in, honey," with a period at the end that felt loaded. His father hadn't reached out at all, which was normal, which was fine, which still stung in a way Ethan pretended it didn't. Deep thoughts? Maya dropped onto the couch beside him, tucking her legs beneath her, her wine glass balanced on her knee. She had Lila's sharpness, but wore it differently, more openly, more deliberately. Where Lila used warmth as her armor, Maya used directness. Just thinking about how good that pie was, Ethan said. It's a family recipe. Mom guards it with her life. She once threatened to cut my dad off from desserts for a month because he almost gave it to his coworker. Maya took a sip of wine. So, you and my sister. Me and your sister. 3 months? That's right. And you live next door to each other. I do. Maya tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that reminded him of Sophie when she was trying to figure out how a toy worked. You know what's funny? Lila didn't mention you once before Thanksgiving, not a word. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, she's got a boyfriend who lives right next door. Convenient timing. Ethan kept his expression neutral. We kept it quiet at first, because of Sophie. I didn't want to bring someone into her life unless I was sure it was going somewhere. And are you sure? He looked across the room at the kitchen doorway, where Lila had appeared with a dish towel over her shoulder, laughing at something Diane had said. Her hair was coming loose from the knot she'd pulled it into, strands falling across her face, and she pushed them back absently with the heel of her hand. Yeah, he said. I'm sure. Maya watched him watch her sister. Something in her expression softened. Not all the way, but enough. She's been through a lot, Maya said. With Trevor. She won't tell you the half of it because that's how she is. She carries things and smiles over them. But it was bad, Ethan. Not in the ways people think of as bad. He never raised his hand. He didn't have to. He just diminished her, slowly, over 2 years. By the time she got out, she didn't know who she was anymore. She seems to know now. She's getting there, but she's still figuring it out, and the last thing she needs is another guy who's going to make her feel small. Maya fixed him with a look that was equal parts warning and plea. Don't make her feel small. I won't. Good. Because if you do, I will make your life miserable, and I'm a graduate student in psychology, so I know exactly how to do it. She said it with a smile that suggested she was only half kidding, and then she stood up, took her wine glass, and wandered off toward Aunt Carol's Cancun story, leaving Ethan alone on the couch with a weight in his chest that hadn't been there before. He wasn't Lila's boyfriend. He knew that. This was a performance, a favor, a one-night arrangement to get through an awkward family gathering. In a few hours, they'd drive home, and he'd go back to apartment 4B, and she'd go back to 4A, and they'd nod at each other in the hallway, and that would be it. But Maya's words stuck. They stuck because they were real, because Maya didn't know this was fake, and so her honesty was unfiltered. And what she'd described about Trevor, about the way Lila had been diminished, about the way she was still rebuilding herself, that was real too. And something about being trusted with that truth, even accidentally, made Ethan feel responsible for it. He got up from the couch and walked to the kitchen doorway. Lila and Diane were finishing the last of the dishes. Diane washing, Lila drying, the two of them working in a rhythm that spoke of years of practice. Need help? Ethan asked. Diane beamed. A man who offers to do dishes. Lila, don't you dare let this one go. Mom, I'm just saying. Ethan picked up a towel and started drying beside Lila, their elbows bumping. She glanced at him sideways, and he caught the faintest trace of something uncertain in her eyes. Like she was trying to figure out how much of this was still the act and how much had crossed into something else. He wasn't sure either. They worked in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the clink of dishes and the faint murmur of the party behind them. Then Diane excused herself to check on something in the living room, and they were alone. Your sister gave me the talk, Ethan said quietly. Lila groaned. What did she say? That if I make you feel small, she'll destroy my life using psychology. Sounds like Maya. She also told me about Trevor, more than what you told me in the car. Lila's hand stilled on the plate she was drying. She didn't look at him. What exactly did she tell you? That it was worse than you let on. That he diminished you. For a long moment, Lila just stood there, staring at the plate in her hands, water dripping from its edge onto the towel. Then she set it on the counter and took a breath. Maya has a habit of sharing more than she should after 2 glasses of wine. She was looking out for you. I know, she always is. She was the one who finally said it out loud, that what Trevor was doing wasn't normal, that it wasn't just being particular or having high standards. She called it what it was, and I hated her for it at first, because hearing it from someone else made it impossible to keep pretending I didn't already know. You don't have to talk about this. I know I don't, but you stood up to him in the kitchen tonight. Don't think I didn't hear about that. My Aunt Carol has ears like a bat, and I feel like I owe you some context. You don't owe me anything, Lila. Maybe not, but I want you to understand something. She finally looked at him. I didn't ask you to do this just to avoid an awkward dinner. I asked because the idea of walking in here alone, of Trevor seeing me alone, of my family seeing me alone, felt like losing. And I know that's stupid. I know that being single isn't losing. But when you've spent 2 years with someone who made you feel like you were nothing without them, and then you leave, and then you show up to a family party by yourself, it confirms every terrible thing they ever said about you. That's not stupid, Ethan said. That's human. It's pathetic. It's not pathetic, it's honest. There's a difference. She looked at him for a long time, and he looked back, and the kitchen was bright and still, and the sounds of the party felt very far away. You're annoyingly good at this, she said. At what? At saying the right thing. Trust me, I'm not. Ask my ex. I once forgot our anniversary and tried to make up for it by buying her a blender. Lila's face broke open into a laugh. The real one, the loud one, the one that carried through walls. A blender? In my defense, she'd mentioned wanting a blender. That is the most tragic thing I've ever heard. It gets worse. I wrapped it in newspaper because we were out of wrapping paper. Stop. I can't. She told her mother. Her mother still brings it up. They were both laughing now, leaning against the counter, and the sound of it filled the kitchen in a way that felt warm and easy and dangerous. Because this was the part that wasn't fake, the laughter, the closeness, the way the space between them kept shrinking without either of them meaning it to. From the living room, Diane called out, "Lila, honey, Trevor's leaving. Come say goodbye." The laughter died. Lila straightened, and Ethan watched the shift happen in real time. The way she pulled herself together, smoothing her dress, squaring her shoulders, putting the smile back on like armor. "Showtime," she said. They walked into the living room together. Trevor was at the door, coat on, shaking Frank's hand, doing the rounds. When he saw Lila and Ethan emerge from the kitchen side by side, something flickered across his face. That same territorial flash from earlier, quick and sharp. "Heading out," Trevor said to the room. Then to Lila, "Great seeing you. Really, you look happy." He said it like an accusation. "I am happy," Lila said, and she reached for Ethan's hand. Trevor's eyes dropped to their clasped fingers, and for a moment, just a moment, the mask cracked. Not anger. Something sadder than that. The look of someone watching a door close that they'd always assumed would stay open. "Well," Trevor said. He cleared his throat. "Merry Christmas, everybody." He left. The door closed behind him, and cold air leaked in through the frame, and the room exhaled. Aunt Carol muttered, "Good riddance," into her wine glass, and Maya snorted, and Frank turned the volume up on the basketball game, and just like that, the tension dissolved. But Lila was still holding Ethan's hand, and she hadn't let go. It was another hour before they finally left. Diane insisted on packing leftovers, an operation that involved 3 Tupperware containers, 2 foil-wrapped packages, and a heated debate about whether the remaining pie should be split or sent home whole. Frank settled it by giving Ethan the entire pie, which Diane protested, which Frank overruled by saying, "The man ate 3 servings of your mashed potatoes, Diane. He's earned the pie." Ethan carried Sophie to the car, her head on his shoulder, rabbit dangling from her limp hand. She was deeply, thoroughly asleep, the kind of sleep that only children and the truly exhausted can achieve, boneless and complete. The snow had tapered to a fine, drifting powder, and the world was white and quiet and cold. Ethan buckled Sophie into her car seat, careful not to wake her, and by the time he slid into the passenger seat, his hands were numb. Lila started the car. The engine turned over on the second try, and the heater groaned to life, pushing cold air that would eventually become warm air through the vents. The dashboard clock read 11:47 p.m. They drove in silence for a while. The expressway was empty, just their headlights cutting through the dark, the snow-covered median, the distant glow of the city ahead. It felt like they were the only car in the world. "Thank you," Lila said finally. "You already thanked me. I'm thanking you again. You didn't have to do any of that. You didn't have to come. You didn't have to stand up to Trevor. You didn't have to. You were really good tonight, Ethan, with my family, with Sophie, with all of it. Your family made it easy. My family is a lot. Your family is great. They're loud and nosy, and your aunt drinks too much, and your sister asks too many questions, and your dad acts tough. But he's a teddy bear, and your mom..." He paused. "Your mom is the kind of mom I wish Sophie had." He hadn't meant to say that. It came out before he could catch it, raw and unedited, and the car went quiet in a way that felt different from the silence before. "Sorry," he said. "That was... Don't apologize." "I didn't mean..." "Ethan, don't apologize for saying something real." He stared out the windshield. The wipers swept back and forth, clearing flakes that immediately replaced themselves. In the back seat, Sophie made a small sound in her sleep, a sigh, or a murmur, or the tail end of a dream. "Rebecca left 14 months ago," he said. He didn't know why he was saying it. Maybe it was the darkness. Maybe it was the fact that Lila had been honest with him in the kitchen, and something in him wanted to return that honesty. "She said she loved me, but she couldn't do this anymore." She meant the apartment, the routine, the diapers and the daycare, and the sameness of it. She wanted more. I don't blame her for that. Everyone wants more. But she left Sophie too, and that part I can't make sense of. Does Sophie ask about her? Sometimes. Less than she used to. She used to ask every morning, "Where's Mommy?" And I'd say the same thing every time. "Mommy's in Portland. Mommy loves you very much." And Sophie would nod, like she understood, except she didn't understand because she was 3. She just learned to stop asking because the answer never changed. Lila's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "That breaks my heart." "Mine too. Every single time." They passed a sign for downtown Chicago, the skyline emerging through the snow like a collection of lit-up monoliths. The city looked beautiful from a distance. It always did. Up close, it was potholes and parking tickets and rent you couldn't quite afford. "Can I ask you something?" Lila said. "Sure." "Why did you say yes tonight? The real reason, not the Salisbury steak joke." Ethan thought about it. He watched the snow and the road and the distant lights, and he thought about the moment Lila had appeared in his doorway with pie and a red reindeer sweater and a grin that was trying very hard to be braver than it felt. "Because you knocked," he said. "What?" "You knocked. You noticed I was alone and you knocked. Nobody does that, not anymore. People see a closed door and they walk past it. They assume you want to be alone, or they don't want to deal with the awkwardness of checking, or they're just busy with their own stuff. But you knocked. And when I opened this door, you didn't ask me if I was okay. You just told me to come to a party. You didn't give me a chance to say no. You didn't give me a chance to talk myself out of it. You just showed up." Lila didn't say anything for a long time. The wipers swept. The heater hummed. Sophie slept. "I knocked because I heard you," Lila said softly. "Through the wall, every night, the TV going at midnight, the pacing, the silence that comes after Sophie goes to bed. I heard all of it, and I kept telling myself it wasn't my business, that you were a grown man and you could handle it. But then tonight, Christmas Eve, I was getting ready to leave for my parents' house, and I heard your microwave beep, and something about that sound, a microwave beep on Christmas Eve, it just..." She trailed off, shook her head. "It made me sad," she finished, "and I don't like being sad. So I knocked." The car pulled off the expressway and into the city streets, which were plowed but still slick, the snow packed into gray ridges along the curbs. Christmas lights blinked from storefronts and apartment windows, red and green and white, reflecting off the wet pavement in smeared ribbons of color. They didn't talk for the rest of the drive. Not because the silence was uncomfortable. It wasn't. It was the opposite. It was the kind of silence that happens when two people have said enough true things to fill the space without words. Lila parked in front of their building, A squat brick 6 flat with a buzzer system that hadn't worked in months, and a front stoop that the landlord never shoveled. Ethan got Sophie out of the car, holding her against his chest, her breath warm on his neck. Lila carried the leftovers and the pie and Sophie's snow boots, which had come off during the drive. They climbed the stairs to the 4th floor, moving quietly, the building asleep around them. The hallway was dim. The overhead light had been flickering for weeks, casting everything in an unsteady yellow glow. They reached their doors, 4A and 4B. Side by side, the way they'd been for 9 months. Lila set the leftovers and boots down by Ethan's door. She straightened up and looked at him holding his sleeping daughter, standing in the half-lit hallway, snow still melting in his hair. "Merry Christmas, Ethan," she said. "Merry Christmas, Lila." She smiled. Not the grin, the other one. The small one. The real one. Then she turned and went into her apartment, and the door closed behind her, and Ethan stood in the hallway for a moment, Sophie warm and heavy in his arms, listening to the sound of Lila's footsteps moving through the wall. He went inside. He laid Sophie in her bed, pulled the covers up to her chin, set Rabbit beside her. He stood in her doorway and watched her breathe, the way he did every night, except tonight it felt different. Tonight the silence didn't press down on him the way it usually did. Tonight it felt softer, like something had opened up in it. A crack, a window, a door. He walked to the kitchen and saw the microwave dinner still sitting on the counter, cold and forgotten. He threw it in the trash. Then he stood at the wall between their apartments, the thin, cheap drywall that separated his life from hers, and he pressed his palm flat against it. On the other side, he heard Lila's footsteps stop. A pause. Then the faint sound of her palm meeting the wall from the other side. They stood like that for a moment. 2 people in 2 apartments, their hands separated by 3 inches of plaster and paint, and the whole complicated, messy, beautiful absurdity of the evening settling around them like snow. Ethan dropped his hand. He heard Lila drop hers. He turned off the kitchen light and went to bed, and for the first time in 14 months, he fell asleep before midnight. Christmas morning came with Sophie's face 2 inches from his, her eyes enormous, her voice a stage whisper that could have been heard 3 floors down. "Daddy, Daddy, it's Christmas." Ethan opened one eye. The clock on his nightstand read 6:14 a.m. He'd slept, actually slept, and the unfamiliarity of that, the absence of the usual 2 a.m. ceiling staring, disoriented him for a moment. "Daddy, wake up. Santa came." He sat up. Sophie was already vibrating with that particular frequency of excitement that 4-year-olds achieve on exactly 2 mornings a year, their birthday and this one. She was wearing her princess dress again, which meant she'd gotten herself dressed, which meant she'd been awake long enough to be deliberate about it. "Let me make coffee first," he said. "No, presents first. Coffee, presents." "Sophie." She grabbed his hand and pulled, and he let himself be pulled, because the truth was he didn't need the coffee. He was already awake in a way he hadn't been in months. That residual warmth from last night still humming in his chest like the tail end of a song. The presents under the drugstore tree were modest. A stuffed elephant that Sophie had pointed at through a store window in November. A set of washable markers and a drawing pad. New pajamas with little rockets on them, because her old ones had gotten too small and she'd been sleeping in oversized t-shirts. He'd wrapped everything himself, badly. The paper bunched at the corners, too much tape in all the wrong places, and Sophie didn't care. She tore through each one with the violent enthusiasm of a kid who understood that the wrapping was an obstacle, not a feature. "An elephant! Daddy, look! An elephant! I see him! His name is Gerald." "Gerald! That's a strong name." She clutched Gerald and Rabbit together, one in each arm, and looked up at him with a face so purely happy that something cracked open in Ethan's chest. "Merry Christmas, sweetheart." "Merry Christmas, Daddy. Can we go see Lila?" The question caught him off guard. "What?" "Lila. The pretty lady from last night. She was nice. Can we go see her?" "Sophie, it's 6 in the morning. Lila's probably asleep." "But I want to show her Gerald." "Gerald can meet Lila later." "When?" "Later." Sophie considered this, clearly dissatisfied with the vagueness of later, but she let it go in favor of attacking the drawing pad with her new markers, and Ethan finally made his coffee and sat on the couch, watching his daughter draw what she claimed was a picture of everyone at the party, a collection of colorful blobs that bore no resemblance to human beings, but somehow captured the chaos of the evening perfectly. He picked up his phone. No messages. He thought about texting Lila, a simple Merry Christmas, but something about that felt loaded. After last night, after the drive home and the hallway and the palm on the wall, a casual text seemed either too much or not enough. He put the phone down. It buzzed immediately. A text from Lila. "Sophie awake yet?" He typed back, "Since 6 a.m. She wants to introduce you to her new elephant." His name? Gerald. "I love Gerald already. Merry Christmas, Ethan." "Merry Christmas, Lila." He stared at the screen, at the ordinariness of the exchange, and felt that crack in his chest widen another fraction. The knock came at 10 o'clock. Ethan opened the door, and Lila was standing there in sweatpants and an oversized flannel shirt, her hair unbrushed, no makeup, holding a plate of cinnamon rolls that were clearly from a can, the kind with the icing packet you squeeze on top. "They're not homemade," she said preemptively. "I'm a terrible baker. My mom would disown me if she saw these." "They look perfect. They look like they came from a tube," which they did. Sophie appeared at Ethan's side, Gerald in one arm, Rabbit in the other. "Lila!" "Sophie, is that Gerald? Let me see this handsome guy." She crouched down and Sophie held out the elephant with both hands, and Lila made a show of examining him, checking his ears, his trunk, his stitched-on smile, with a seriousness that Sophie responded to completely. "He's excellent," Lila declared. "Top-tier elephant." "He's friends with Rabbit," Sophie explained. "Obviously. They're going to be best friends. I can tell." Ethan leaned against the door frame, watching them, and something settled in his stomach. Not butterflies, not excitement, but something quieter and more dangerous. A sense of fit, like a piece slotting into a space he'd forgotten was empty. "Come in," he said. "I'll make more coffee." They spent Christmas morning in his apartment, Lila on the floor with Sophie, drawing pictures and building elaborate scenarios with Gerald and Rabbit that involved a castle, a dragon, and a trip to the grocery store that somehow became the climax of the entire narrative. Ethan sat on the couch with his coffee, watching, occasionally being drafted into the story as the king who makes sandwiches, a role he accepted with minimal protest. It was easy. That was the thing that scared him. It was so easy. Lila fit into the apartment, into their morning, without friction, without awkwardness, like she'd been doing this for years. She didn't try too hard. She didn't perform the role of woman who's good with children. She just sat on the floor and played. And when Sophie got bossy about the storyline, which she did frequently, Lila pushed back with a gentle stubbornness that made Sophie giggle. "Gerald can't fly," Sophie insisted. "He's an elephant." "Why can't elephants fly?" "Because they don't have wings." "What if he has invisible wings?" Sophie's face scrunched up with the effort of processing this radical concept. "Invisible wings?" "Yeah, wings you can't see. They only come out when no one's looking." "That's not real." "How would you know? You can't see them." Sophie stared at her. Then she broke into a grin. "Okay, Gerald has invisible wings, but only sometimes." "Deal." Ethan shook his head. "You're going to be a terrible influence on her." "I'm going to be the best influence on her. She's going to have the most creative imagination in her entire kindergarten class." "She's not in kindergarten yet." "Pre-gaming." He laughed, and Lila looked up at him from the floor, her hair falling across her face, and their eyes met. And the laugh died in his throat because something passed between them that wasn't funny at all. It lasted 2 seconds. Maybe 3. Then Sophie demanded attention for Gerald's invisible wing takeoff, and the moment dissolved. But Ethan felt it settling into him. The accumulation of these small, charged instants, the hand-holding at the party, the conversation in the kitchen, the palms on the wall, and now this, the look. Each one stacking on the last, building towards something he wasn't sure he could handle. Around noon, Lila's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her face changed. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked. "My mom. She wants us to come for Christmas dinner." "Us. You, me, Sophie. She's making a turkey. She said, and I quote, 'Bring that sweet man and his little princess before I drive to the city and collect them myself.'" Ethan sat up. "Lila, we can't keep doing this. Last night was supposed to be a one-time thing." "I know. If we go to dinner, we're deepening the lie. Your family's going to get more attached. Your mom's going to start buying me birthday presents." "She's already bought you a birthday present." "What?" "I'm kidding. Probably. I honestly can't rule it out." "Lila." She pulled her knees to her chest and wrapped her arms around them, and he could see her thinking, actually thinking, not just deflecting. Sophie was on the other side of the room, having Gerald fly in circles above the carpet, singing a song she was inventing in real time. "You're right," Lila said. "You're completely right. I'll tell her we can't make it. I'll say Sophie's tired, or you have plans, or—" "I don't have plans." "What?" "I don't have plans. Sophie doesn't have plans. We were going to eat leftover ham from last night and watch a movie." So I'm saying yes, even though it's a terrible idea and we're digging ourselves deeper into a hole that's going to be very hard to climb out of." "Why?" He looked at Sophie. She was making Gerald do a loop-de-loop, narrating the flight path in a breathless commentary. She was happy. She was genuinely, completely happy, and the sound of it, the silly singing, the made-up words, the pure noise of a child who didn't know the world could be hard, filled the apartment in a way it hadn't been filled in over a year. "Because my daughter hasn't smiled like that in a long time," he said, "and because your mom's turkey is probably incredible." "It is incredible." "Then we're going." Lila bit her lip, and he could see the conflict in her. The gratitude wrestling with the guilt, the pleasure of having someone say yes, fighting against the knowledge that yes was making everything more complicated. "One more night," she said, "and then I'll figure out how to tell my family the truth." One more night. The second trip to Naperville felt different. The nervousness from the night before was gone, replaced by something looser, more familiar. Sophie was awake this time, chattering from the back seat about Gerald's adventures, asking Lila questions with the relentless curiosity of a 4-year-old who'd found a new favorite person. "Do you have a dog?" "I don't, but I want one." "What kind?" "A big one. A golden retriever, maybe." "I want a puppy." "Everyone wants a puppy." "Daddy says we can't have a puppy because the apartment is too small." "Your daddy might have a point there. But Gerald wants a puppy too." "Well, if Gerald wants one, that changes everything." Ethan drove this time. Lila had handed him the keys without being asked, and he'd taken them without thinking, and neither of them commented on how natural the exchange felt. The highway was clearer today, the snow reduced to scattered flurries, and the city gave way to suburbs under a sky that was trying, half-heartedly, to find some blue. When they pulled up to the house, Diane was already at the door. She had Sophie in her arms within 30 seconds, Gerald and Rabbit included, and was carrying her into the kitchen before Ethan had finished unbuttoning his coat. "That woman is going to kidnap my child," he muttered. "She's going to spoil her rotten and send her home on a sugar high," Lila agreed. "I'd apologize, but this is what Diane Bennett does. She feeds people and loves people, and you just have to let it happen." The house was quieter today, just the immediate family. Frank, Diane, Maya. No Aunt Carol, no cousins, no Trevor. The relief of that last absence was visible on Lila's face, a loosening around her eyes and jaw that Ethan noticed because he'd been watching her, and he'd been watching her because he couldn't seem to stop. Dinner was a long, slow affair. Diane had cooked enough food for twice as many people, and she kept the plates full with a persistence that bordered on aggressive hospitality. The turkey was, as promised, incredible. Frank had opened a bottle of wine that he said was the good stuff, a claim Ethan couldn't verify, since all wine tasted roughly the same to him, and the conversation was easy and wandering, moving from topic to topic with the comfortable shapelessness of a family that had run out of things to prove to each other. Sophie sat at the table in a booster seat Diane had produced from somewhere. Left over from when the girls were small, and ate mashed potatoes with her fingers until Ethan gently redirected her toward a fork. She had Gerald on the table beside her plate, and Diane had set a place for Rabbit without being asked. "You set a place for a stuffed animal," Maya said, eyebrows raised. "Rabbit is a guest," Diane replied, as though this were obvious. Maya caught Ethan's eye across the table and gave him a look that said, "See what I grew up with?" He returned a look that said, "I'd take it in a heartbeat." After dinner, while Diane and Lila cleared the table and Maya retreated to the couch with her phone, Frank took Ethan to the garage to show him what he called the project, a 1967 Ford Mustang that he'd been restoring for what appeared to be the last decade. "She's not done," Frank said, running his hand along the hood. "Probably never will be. But that's not the point." "What's the point?" "Keeps me busy. Keeps me in here instead of in there." He jerked his thumb toward the house. "Diane thinks I'm out here because I love cars. I'm out here because if I spend too many hours in that kitchen, I start losing arguments. And I don't lose arguments, Ethan. I'm very good at arguments. But that woman," he shook his head, "that woman can win an argument about nothing. She once convinced me I was wrong about my own birthday." Ethan laughed. Frank didn't. He was completely serious. "I like you," Frank said after a pause. "I want you to know that." "I appreciate that, Frank. I didn't like Trevor. I didn't like the way he talked. I didn't like the way he looked at Lila, like she was a thing he'd acquired. A man shouldn't look at a woman that way. A man should look at a woman the way you look at my daughter." Ethan froze. "How do I look at your daughter?" Frank considered the question. "Like she confuses you, like you're trying to figure something out. That's good. That means you're paying attention." He leaned against the Mustang. "The men who think they've got it figured out, those are the dangerous ones. Trevor had it all figured out. Every answer, every plan, every move calculated. Lila was a checkbox. You're not like that." "I'm really not." "Good." Frank straightened up and clapped Ethan on the shoulder, set one firm hit, the kind that conveyed more than a handshake. "Now let's go back inside before Diane sends a search party." The living room was dim when they came back in. Someone had turned off the overhead lights and left only the tree and a table lamp, creating a warm, amber glow that softened the edges of everything. Diane was in the kitchen, packing leftovers again. Maya was on the phone in the hallway, talking to someone in a low voice. Sophie was asleep. Again. This time on the couch, curled against a throw pillow, Gerald tucked under her arm exactly the way Rabbit usually was. Lila was standing by the tree. She was looking at the ornaments, the popsicle stick stars, the glitter pine cones, the lopsided angel, with an expression that Ethan couldn't quite read. Nostalgia, maybe, or something heavier. She reached out and touched one of the ornaments, a small clay handprint painted red, with Lila, age 5, scratched into the back. "I made this in kindergarten," she said when she heard him approach. "My mom's kept every ornament we ever made, every single one. There's a whole box in the attic. Maya's stuff, my stuff, going all the way back to when we were toddlers." "That's nice." "It is nice. It's also kind of devastating if you think about it too hard. All these little versions of yourself, hanging on a tree. All these moments when you were small and everything was simple." She turned to him. "Do you keep Sophie's stuff?" "Everything. Her drawings, her school projects, the little handprint thing from daycare. I've got a box in my closet that's getting too full to close." "See? You're a good dad." "I'm an adequate dad on my best days." "You're a good dad, Ethan. Sophie thinks you hung the moon, it's obvious." He stood beside her, and they looked at the tree together, and the house was quiet around them. That particular Christmas quiet that feels different from every other kind of silence, thick and slow, like the world itself is resting. "Look," Lila said, and pointed up. He followed her gaze. Above them, hanging from the archway between the living room and the hallway, was a sprig of mistletoe. It was real, not plastic, not decorative. A small cluster of green leaves and white berries, tied with a red ribbon, hung there by someone who believed in traditions, and probably also believed in forcing people into uncomfortable situations. "My mother," Lila said, and her voice held a note of exasperated affection. "She hangs that thing in the same spot every year." "We don't have to." "No, we don't." They stood there. The tree glowed. The mistletoe hung. From the kitchen, the faint sound of Diane humming something. From the couch, Sophie's soft, even breathing. Lila turned to face him. She was close, closer than she needed to be, closer than the act required. Her eyes were dark in the dim light, and her expression was the one he'd never seen before tonight. Open, uncertain, stripped of the grin and the deflection and all the bright defensive energy she carried like a shield. "Ethan," she said quietly. "Yeah? I don't know what I'm doing. That makes two of us. I mean, I brought you here to pretend. That was the deal. A few hours, a little acting, we go home. Except nothing about tonight feels like acting. Nothing about this morning felt like acting. You sat on my floor and played elephants with your daughter, and I looked at you and I thought," she stopped, swallowed. "I thought, this is what it's supposed to look like." He didn't move, he didn't breathe. "And I know that's crazy," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know we've been neighbors for 9 months, and we've barely spoken, and this whole thing started because I was too proud to show up to a party alone. I know all of that, but I also know what I felt last night in the car, and what I felt this morning when Sophie showed me that elephant, and what I'm feeling right now standing under this stupid mistletoe, and none of it is fake." The house was so quiet he could hear the lights on the tree humming. "Lila," he said. "Yeah? I'm gonna kiss you." "Okay. Not for your mom, not for the act, not because of the mistletoe. Okay? Because I want to. Okay." He kissed her. It wasn't smooth, it wasn't cinematic. His hand came up to her face and his thumb caught in her hair, and she made a small, startled sound against his mouth, and he tasted wine and cinnamon and something that was just her, and his heart was hammering so hard he was sure she could feel it. She kissed him back, tentative at first, then not tentative at all, and her hand found the front of his shirt and held on, and the kiss deepened, and the tree glowed, and the mistletoe hung above them like a witness. When they pulled apart, they were both breathing harder than they should have been. "Well," Lila said. "Well. That was, yeah, not fake. Not even a little." She laughed, shaky and quiet, and pressed her forehead against his chin, and he put his arms around her because it seemed like the only thing in the world that made sense, and they stood there in the glow of the Christmas tree, holding each other, and neither of them spoke because what was there to say? The pretending was over. It had been over since the car ride home last night, maybe earlier, maybe since she'd knocked on his door with pie and a red reindeer sweater and a lie that had accidentally told the truth. A soft gasp came from the kitchen doorway. Ethan looked up. Diane was standing there, dish towel in hand, eyes wide, hand pressed over her mouth. She'd seen. Of course she'd seen. Diane Bennett had radar for exactly this kind of moment. Lila turned, saw her mother, and closed her eyes. "Mom, I'm not here," Diane whispered, backing away. "I didn't see anything. I'm in the kitchen. I don't exist." "Mom, please. Frank!" Diane's whisper had the carrying power of a bullhorn. "Frank, get in here. Don't come into the living room, but get in here." "What?" Frank's voice from the garage. "Just come here." "You don't exist, remember?" Lila called after her. "I don't. This is a ghost talking, a ghost who's very happy for you." Lila buried her face in Ethan's chest, and he felt her laughing, silent, helpless laughter that shook her shoulders and vibrated against his ribs. "Your family," he said. "My family. Your mother is going to tell everyone. She's already texting Aunt Carol. I guarantee it." He tightened his arms around her. She let him. And the tree glowed and the mistletoe hung, and in the kitchen, Diane was whisper screaming at Frank about something wonderful, and on the couch, Sophie slept with Gerald and Rabbit, dreaming whatever 4-year-olds dream about on Christmas night. Ethan closed his eyes. He thought about the microwave dinner on the counter, the empty apartment, the silence that had been his companion for 14 months. He thought about how a single knock on a door had unraveled everything. His solitude, his caution, his carefully maintained distance from anything that could hurt him again. Lila pulled back slightly and looked up at him. Her eyes were bright and wet and scared and brave all at once. "What happens now?" she asked. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. His hand was trembling, and he didn't try to hide it. "I don't know," he said, "but I don't want to pretend anymore." "Neither do I." He kissed her again, softer this time, and she kissed him back. And somewhere in the kitchen, Diane dropped a pan and Frank said something gruff about privacy, and Maya walked in from the hallway, saw them, said, "Finally," and walked back out. And Ethan Brooks, standing under a sprig of mistletoe in a house that wasn't his, holding a woman he'd known for 9 months and was only now beginning to truly see, felt something he hadn't felt in so long he'd forgotten the name for it. It wasn't perfection. It wasn't certainty. It was messier than that, more fragile, more terrifying. It was the feeling of stepping off solid ground and not knowing where your foot would land, and choosing to step anyway. It was the beginning of something real. They didn't talk about it on the drive home. Not because there was nothing to say. There was too much to say, and that was worse. The kiss sat between them in the car like a third passenger, taking up all the air, and Ethan gripped the steering wheel and stared at the road and tried to organize his thoughts into something coherent. But every time he got close to forming a sentence, he'd glance over at Lila in the passenger seat and lose it entirely. She was looking out the window, her reflection ghosting across the glass, and he couldn't read her expression. Sophie was asleep in the back, her third car seat nap in 2 days, a personal record, and the only sounds were the wipers and the heater and the soft static of a radio station neither of them had bothered to tune properly. They pulled up to the building. They climbed the stairs. They reached the 4th floor, and Ethan carried Sophie to his door, and Lila stood at hers, and they looked at each other across the 3 feet of hallway that separated 4A from 4B. "Good night," Lila said. "Good night." She went inside. He went inside. The doors closed. Ethan stood in his dark apartment, holding his sleeping daughter, and pressed his back against the door and said quietly to no one, "What are you doing?" He didn't have an answer. He put Sophie to bed. He brushed his teeth. He changed into sweatpants and an old college t-shirt and sat on the couch in the dark, staring at the wall, and listening for sounds from the other side. He heard Lila's footsteps, heard water running, heard the creak of her floorboards as she moved from room to room, then silence. His phone was in his hand. He typed a message. "We should talk." He stared at it, deleted it, typed, "About tonight." Deleted that too. Typed, "Are you awake?" And then threw the phone onto the couch cushion beside him like it was hot. It buzzed. "Lila, I can hear you thinking through the wall." He picked it up. "I think loud." "Come outside." "What?" "The back of the building, the fire escape. 5 minutes." He stared at the message. He looked at Sophie's door, closed, nightlight humming. She was out cold. He'd be 20 feet away, just outside the window. He could hear her if she called. He grabbed his coat, shoved his feet into boots, and climbed out the kitchen window onto the fire escape. The cold hit him like a slap. It was well below freezing now, the kind of Chicago cold that doesn't creep. It attacks. The snow had stopped, but the sky was heavy and low, orange-gray with reflected city light, and the alley below was a narrow canyon of dumpsters and parked cars buried under white. Lila was already there. She was sitting on the metal grating of the fire escape, her coat zipped to her chin, a wool hat pulled down over her ears, her breath coming in short, visible bursts. She looked up when he climbed out. "Hi," she said. "Hi." "Sit down." He sat beside her. The metal was freezing through his jeans. Their shoulders touched. "This is insane, Ike," he said. "It's negative something out here." "I know, but I couldn't do this through a wall, and I couldn't do it in a hallway, and I definitely couldn't do it inside, because if I'm inside with you right now, I'm going to—" She stopped, took a breath. "I needed cold air. Cold air makes me think clearly." And I'm thinking clearly." "Good. What are you thinking?" She pulled her knees up and wrapped her arms around them, the same position from that morning in his apartment. And she looked out at the alley and the snow and the backs of the buildings lining the block, all those dark windows and fire escapes and lives stacked on top of each other. "I'm thinking I screwed up," she said. His stomach dropped. "Okay." "Not the kiss. The kiss was—" She shook her head. "The kiss was the only part I didn't screw up. I'm talking about everything else. The lie. Telling my family you were my boyfriend. dragging you into this whole performance. I should have just shown up alone. I should have been honest. Instead, I used you as a prop because I was too scared to face Trevor and too proud to admit I was lonely. And now something real happened, and it's built on top of a lie, and I don't know how to separate the two. Ethan let out a long breath. It hung in the air between them, white and shapeless. "Can I tell you something?" he said. "Yeah." I said yes because of the Salisbury steak. That's what I told you. And that's partially true. It really was a sad dinner, but the actual reason I said yes is because I was scared. Scared of what? Of another Christmas Eve alone. Of putting Sophie to bed and sitting in that apartment and feeling the walls close in. I've been doing this for 14 months. The single dad thing, the everything alone thing, and I've been telling myself I'm fine, I'm handling it, I don't need anyone. And then you showed up with pie and asked me to come to a party, and I realized I wasn't fine at all. I was drowning, and I'd gotten so used to the water that I forgot I was supposed to be breathing. Lila turned to look at him. Her face was pink from the cold, her eyes watering, from the wind or from something else, he couldn't tell. "That's not your fault," she said. "It's not about fault. It's about the truth. You think you used me as a prop?" "Maybe. But I used you too. I used your family as a substitute for the one I don't have. I sat at your mom's table and ate her food and played with your dad in the garage, and for a few hours, I got to pretend I had something I've been missing. So if you screwed up, we screwed up together." A siren wailed somewhere in the distance. Far away, fading. A car crunched through the snow in the alley below, headlights sweeping across the building's brick wall, then gone. "I'm a mess, Ethan," Lila said. She said it plainly, without self-pity, the way you'd state a weather condition. "I know I come across as the fun neighbor, the bubbly girl who laughs at everything and brings pie to people. And that's real. I'm not faking that. But underneath it, I'm a 30-year-old woman who spent 2 years with a man who made me smaller every day, and I let him. I chose him. I stayed. And when I finally left, I didn't even feel relieved. I felt lost. Because when someone's been making all your decisions for you, and they're gone, and you suddenly have to decide things for yourself, what to eat, what to wear, what to watch, who to be, it's paralyzing. I spent the first month after Trevor eating cereal for dinner because I couldn't decide what to cook. There's nothing wrong with cereal for dinner. I ate it for 31 days straight, Ethan. That's not a quirky single girl thing. That's a woman who forgot how to function. And now? Now I'm better, most days. I go to work, I see my friends, I cook actual food. But there's this thing underneath, this fear that I'm going to fall into it again. That I'm going to meet someone and lose myself. That I'm going to hand over my edges piece by piece until there's nothing left. She paused. That's why I told my family about you before anything was real. Because if you were fictional, if you were just a story I made up to get my mom off my back, then you couldn't hurt me. You couldn't take anything from me. You were safe. And now I'm not fictional. No. Now you're sitting on a fire escape in negative whatever, and you kissed me under the mistletoe, and my mom saw, and your daughter calls me by name, and nothing about this is safe anymore. The fire escape creaked under them. The cold was seeping through everything. His coat, his jeans, his bones. He could feel it in his fingers, in his ears, in the tip of his nose. But he didn't move. He didn't want to move. He wanted to stay in this moment, in this conversation, because it was the most honest anyone had been with him in years. And the honesty, despite the cold, felt like warmth. "I'm a mess too," he said. "Different kind of mess, but a mess. I work too much. I use Sophie's schedule as an excuse to avoid having a life. I haven't been on a date since Rebecca left, not because I'm noble or devoted, but because I'm terrified. The last woman I let in packed 2 suitcases and moved to Oregon. Portland. Same thing." He rubbed his hands together, trying to generate warmth. "I have this thing I do. I build walls. Not literal ones, although, yeah, literal ones too. That's my job. But emotional walls. I'm really good at it. I can be in a room full of people and still be completely alone, because I've constructed this barrier between me and everyone else, and it's thick and reinforced and up to code, and nobody gets through. It's efficient, it's safe, and it's killing me." Sounds lonely. It is lonely. It's the loneliest thing in the world. He looked at her. "And then you knocked on my door. And you dragged me to a Christmas party. And you introduced me to your family and made me hold your hand and defend you from your ex-boyfriend and eat 3 servings of your mom's mashed potatoes. And somewhere in the middle of all that, you knocked a hole in the wall. Not a big one, just enough to let light in. And now I can see what's on the other side, and I can't unsee it. Lila's eyes were bright. She blinked, and a tear tracked down her cheek, and she wiped it away impatiently like it was bothering her. "That's the most words I've ever heard you say at once," she said. "I've been saving them up." She laughed. A real laugh, but shaky. The kind that sits right on the edge of crying. "What do we do?" she asked. "I don't know." "That's not helpful." "I know, but I don't have a plan. I didn't plan any of this. 2 days ago, my biggest concern was whether Sophie's daycare would reopen after the holidays. Now I'm sitting on a fire escape at midnight, telling a woman I've known for 9 months things I've never told anyone. Technically, you've known me for 9 months, but only spoken to me for about 36 hours. It's been a productive 36 hours. She laughed again, and this time it was steadier, and she leaned into him. Not dramatically, not cinematically, just a slow sideways tilt until her head rested against his shoulder. Her hat was scratchy against his neck. He could smell her shampoo. Something herbal, something warm. "I need to tell my family the truth," she said, "about how this started." "Okay." "They're going to be mad. Maya's going to kill me. My mom's going to cry. My dad's going to do that thing where he gets very quiet, which is worse than yelling." "I'll be there when you tell them." She lifted her head. "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to. I want to. I was part of the lie. I should be part of the truth." "They might hate you." "They might, but they might also understand. People do stupid things when they're scared. Your family seems like the kind that gets that." Lila was quiet for a moment. She took off her hat and ran her fingers through her hair, a nervous gesture he was starting to recognize, and then put it back on, crookedly, one ear half covered and the other exposed. "Your hat's crooked," he said. "I know. Here." He reached over and adjusted it, pulling it down over both ears, his fingers brushing her temples, her jaw, the cold skin of her cheeks. She held very still while he did it, her eyes on his face, and when he pulled his hands back, she caught one of them and held it. "Your hands are freezing," she said. "Everything about me is freezing." "Then come here." She opened her coat, an oversized parka that was 3 sizes too big, probably her dad's, and pulled his hand inside against the warmth of her sweater and held it there. His fingers burned as the warmth hit them, a sharp needle-like sensation that made him wince. "Ow." "Don't be a baby. It actually hurts." "That's the blood coming back. It's supposed to hurt." They sat like that, his hand warming against her ribs, her coat wrapped around both of them as much as it could manage. And the alley was silent, and the city hummed, and the fire escape held them 4 stories above the ground, balanced between inside and out, between the lives they'd built separately and whatever this new thing was that they were building together. "Rebecca," Lila said after a while. "Sophie's mom. Do you still love her?" It was a direct question, the kind most people danced around, and Ethan appreciated that Lila didn't dance. "No," he said. "I don't think I've loved her in a long time. Maybe before she left, even. We'd become roommates who shared a child, going through the motions, splitting duties, passing each other in the hallway and not stopping. When she left, I was angry. Then I was hurt. Then I was relieved, and the relief scared me more than anything else, because what kind of man is relieved when his daughter's mother leaves? The kind who was unhappy and didn't know how to admit it. Maybe. Not maybe. Definitely. You just described exactly what happened with me and Trevor, except I was the one who left. And the relief, that guilty, confusing relief, I know exactly what that feels like. It doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a person who was stuck and got unstuck. Sophie doesn't understand any of that. Sophie understands that her father is here. Every morning, every bedtime, every bad day and good day and weird day. She understands that you stayed. That's the only thing that matters to a 4-year-old. He looked at her. In the orange-gray glow of the city sky, her face was half lit and half shadowed, and she looked tired and cold and certain, more certain than she'd been all night, more certain than he'd ever seen her. "When did you get wise?" he asked. "I'm not wise. I'm a 30-year-old woman who ate cereal for a month. I just know what it looks like when someone's beating themselves up, because I do it every day." "You should stop that." "You first." He almost smiled. "Deal." "Deal." A gust of wind cut through the alley, sharp and bitter, and Lila shivered against him, and he pulled her closer without thinking. His arm around her shoulders, her body against his side, the two of them huddled on a frozen fire escape like refugees from their own lives. "I want to try this," she said into his coat. "For real? Not the fake version, not the performance. I want to try actually being with you, but I need you to know what you're getting into. I'm messy. I have bad days where I don't want to talk to anyone. I get defensive when people get too close. I'll probably push you away at least once, maybe more than once, and it won't be because I don't want you. It'll be because I'm scared, and I need you to not take it personally. Can you do that?" "I can try." "Trying is enough. Then you need to know what you're getting into, too. I have a 4-year-old who is my entire world, and she comes first, always. No exceptions. I work long hours, and sometimes I bring work home, and I forget to eat, and I pace at 2 a.m. because my brain won't shut off. I'm not romantic. I forgot my ex's anniversary and gave her a blender. I'm bad at texting back, and I haven't let anyone in since Rebecca, which means I don't actually know how to do this anymore. I might be terrible at it. You won't be terrible at it. You don't know that. I know that you stood up to Trevor without being asked. I know that you played elephants on the floor with Sophie for 2 hours and never once looked bored. I know that you ate my mom's food and talked to my dad about cars and let my sister interrogate you and didn't flinch. And I know that you just told me everything you're afraid of, which is braver than anything Trevor did in 2 years. So yeah, Ethan, I think you'll be fine." He didn't say anything. He couldn't. The words were stuck somewhere behind his sternum, a whole tangled mess of things he wanted to express but didn't have the language for. Gratitude, fear, tenderness, the terrifying certainty that this woman was going to change his life, whether he was ready for it or not. So he kissed her instead. Not like the mistletoe. Not in front of anyone. Not for show or tradition or circumstance. He kissed her on a fire escape in the freezing cold, with numb lips and a runny nose and wind cutting through his coat, and it was graceless and uncomfortable, and his neck was at a bad angle, and her hat bumped against his forehead. And it was the most honest kiss he'd ever had. She kissed him back, slow and deliberate, like she was making a decision with every second of contact. Her cold hands found his face, and his cold hands found her waist, and they held each other in the wind and the cold and the glow of the city, two imperfect people making an imperfect choice, and it felt more right than anything either of them had experienced in years. When they finally broke apart, Lila's nose was red, and her eyes were wet, and she was smiling. Not the grin, not the performance, but the real one, the one he was starting to learn was only for him. "We should go inside," she said. "I can't feel my feet. I can't feel anything below my knees. We're going to get frostbite." "Worth it." She laughed and shoved him gently, and he shoved her back, and they climbed through their respective windows. Lila into 4A, Ethan into 4B. And the last thing he saw before she disappeared was her face in the window frame, backlit by her kitchen light, still smiling. He closed the window. He checked on Sophie. Still asleep, still holding Gerald, still breathing that deep, easy rhythm. He stood over her bed and watched her, the way he did every night, but tonight the watching felt different. Tonight it felt less like guarding and more like hoping. "We're going to be okay, Soph," he whispered. She didn't stir. Rabbit had fallen to the floor at some point, and he picked it up and tucked it back under her arm, next to Gerald, the two stuffed animals forming a small, soft army around her. He went back to the kitchen. He stood at the wall. He didn't press his palm against it this time. He just stood there, listening, and on the other side he heard Lila moving around, the fridge opening, a glass of water being poured, the floorboards settling as she walked. Then her voice, muffled through the plaster, barely audible but unmistakable. "Good night, Ethan." He put his hand on the wall. "Good night, Lila." He went to bed. He lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and instead of the usual inventory of fears and regrets and 2 a.m. anxieties, his mind played back the evening in fragments. Lila's face in the tree light, the scratch of her hat against his neck, the way she'd said, "Trying is enough," like it was the truest thing she'd ever spoken. He fell asleep with his hand still warm from where she'd held it inside her coat, and the radiator clanged its usual song, and for the second night in a row, the silence didn't hurt. Lila told her family on New Year's Day. She'd spent the week between Christmas and New Year's agonizing over it, pacing her apartment, drafting speeches in her head, rehearsing explanations in the bathroom mirror like a defendant preparing for trial. Ethan heard it all through the wall, the pacing, the muttering, the occasional groan of frustration. Twice he heard her phone ring, and both times she let it go to voicemail, and both times the voicemail was Diane asking about plans for New Year's Eve. He offered to be there. She said no. Then she said yes. Then she said no again. Then, on the morning of January 1st, she knocked on his door. She was always knocking on his door now. It had become a pattern, a rhythm, the opening note of something, and said, "Come with me, please. I can't do this alone." So he went. They drove to Naperville in silence. Sophie stayed with Ethan's coworker, Marcus, who had a daughter the same age and who'd agreed to a play date without asking why Ethan looked like he was heading to a funeral. The car ride was tense and quiet, Lila's hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, and Ethan sat in the passenger seat trying to think of something reassuring to say and coming up empty. "They're going to hate me," Lila said, somewhere around the Eisenhower Expressway. "They're not going to hate you. My mom's going to cry. Probably. My dad's going to do the quiet thing. Probably. Maya's going to say, 'I knew it,' and look smug. Almost certainly. You're supposed to be making me feel better. I'm supposed to be honest. Those are different things." She shot him a look, but there was the ghost of a smile behind it. They arrived at the house. The plastic Santa in the yard had been taken down, leaving a Santa-shaped patch of less trampled snow, and the Christmas lights were still up but turned off, hanging along the gutters like sleeping snakes. The house looked different in daylight without the warm glow of the holiday, more ordinary, more vulnerable. Frank opened the door. He looked at Ethan, then at Lila, then back at Ethan, and something in his expression suggested he already knew this wasn't a social call. "Coffee's on," he said, and stepped aside. They sat at the kitchen table, Ethan and Lila on one side, Diane and Frank on the other, Maya in the doorway leaning against the frame with her arms crossed. The kitchen was clean, the counters bare, the dish rack empty. The house had that deflated feeling that comes after Christmas. All the magic packed into boxes. The ordinary reasserting itself. Lila started talking. She told them everything. How she'd invented the boyfriend to get Diane off her back. How she'd described Ethan without his knowledge. How she'd knocked on his door on Christmas Eve and asked him to play along. She told it plainly, without spin, without making herself the hero or the victim. She just laid it out. The fear of facing Trevor alone. The pride that wouldn't let her show up single. The lie that grew legs and walked itself into their living room. Diane listened with her hands wrapped around her coffee mug, her face going through stages. Confusion, then understanding, then hurt. Frank listened the way Frank did everything. Still, measured, his eyes on some middle distance, processing. Maya said, "I knew something was off," and Lila said, "Maya, not now." And Maya said, "Fine," and went back to leaning. When Lila finished, the kitchen was quiet. The coffee maker ticked. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a dog barked in someone's yard. "So Christmas Eve," Diane said slowly. "When you walked in holding hands, when he sat at our table, when he played with Sophie in the living room, all of that was, it started that way," Lila said. "But it didn't stay that way." Diane looked at Ethan. "Did you know? From the beginning?" "Yes, ma'am. She told me at my door. I agreed to it." "Why?" Ethan had thought about this question. He'd rehearsed answers. None of them felt adequate, so he went with the truth. "Because my daughter and I were about to eat a microwave dinner alone on Christmas Eve, and your daughter showed up and offered us something better. The lie was her idea. But saying yes, that was mine." Diane's lip trembled. She set down her coffee mug and pressed both palms flat on the table, the way people do when they're trying to hold themselves together. "I feel foolish," she said. "Mom, I hugged this man at the door. I set a place for him at my table. I told Aunt Carol—" She stopped, and her face crumpled, and the tears came, and Ethan felt something awful twist in his gut because this was a good woman who'd been lied to by her own daughter, and no amount of context made that okay. Lila reached across the table for her mother's hand. Diane pulled away, not harshly, but definitely, and the rejection landed on Lila's face like a physical blow. "I'm sorry," Lila said. Her voice cracked. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have told you the truth. I should have just said I was coming alone. I was a coward." "You're not a coward," Frank said. It was the first thing he'd said since they sat down. "You were scared. There's a difference." He looked at Diane. "Give her a minute, Di." "I don't need a minute. I need to understand why my daughter couldn't tell me she was single. Am I that terrible? Am I so pushy about this that my own child felt she had to invent a boyfriend to shut me up?" The question hung in the air, and it was the kind of question that didn't have a safe answer, because the honest answer was yes. Diane's relentless pushing had been part of the problem. But saying that out loud in this kitchen would cause more damage than it fixed. Lila said it anyway. "Yes, Mom, a little bit." Diane flinched. "Every phone call," Lila continued, her voice steadier now, the way it got when she was pushing through something hard. "Every text. Have you met anyone? When are you going to settle down? Jennifer got engaged. Your friend Ashley is pregnant." Every conversation circled back to the same place. Why am I alone? When am I going to fix that? Like being single was a problem that needed solving. "And I know you didn't mean it that way. I know it came from love. But after Trevor, after 2 years of a man who made me feel like I wasn't enough on my own, hearing my mother ask, 'Why are you still alone?' felt like confirmation that he was right." The kitchen went silent again. Diane's tears had stopped, replaced by something worse, a stricken, hollow look, the look of someone realizing they'd caused harm without knowing it. "I didn't know," Diane whispered. "About Trevor. Not really. Not the way Maya told me after Christmas. I thought you were just growing apart. I didn't know he was... I didn't tell you. That's on me. I smiled through the whole thing and pretended everything was fine, and by the time I got out, I was so used to pretending that I couldn't stop. The boyfriend lie was just the latest version of the same thing I'd been doing for years, performing okay instead of actually being okay." Maya moved from the doorway to the table. She sat down beside Diane and put her hand on her mother's arm, and the four of them sat there. 5 if you counted Frank, who was in his chair at the head of the table like a silent sentinel, and the weight of everything that had been said pressed down on the room. "The kiss was real," Diane said suddenly. "Under the mistletoe. That was real." Lila looked at Ethan. He looked back. "That was real," Lila said. "And now? You two? Is that real?" "Yes." Diane studied them. First Lila, then Ethan, then the space between them, measuring something that couldn't be measured. "Well," she said. She picked up her coffee mug, took a sip, set it down. "I'm still angry." "I know. I'm going to be angry for a while." "I know. But I'm also..." She stopped. Her jaw worked. "I'm also sorry. For the pushing. I didn't realize what I was doing, and I should have. A mother should know better." "Mom, you don't have to..." "Yes, I do. If I'm asking you to be honest, I have to be honest too. I was scared for you. After Trevor. I saw my daughter hurting and I didn't know how to fix it, so I did what I always do. I pushed. I pushed toward the thing I thought would make it better, which was someone new, someone good, without considering that maybe what you needed was space to figure out who you were without anyone." Frank cleared his throat. "Can I say something?" Everyone looked at him. "The man's here," Frank said, nodding at Ethan. "He didn't have to be. He could have let Lila do this alone, and nobody would have blamed him. But he's here. That tells me what I need to know." He paused. "And for the record, I don't care how this started. I care how it ends. And from what I'm looking at, it's ending in the right place." Frank stood up, pushed his chair in, and walked out of the kitchen. A moment later, the garage door opened, and Ethan understood. Frank had said his piece, and now he was going to his Mustang, because that was where Frank went when the emotional temperature in the house exceeded his tolerance. Diane reached across the table. This time, Lila took her hand. They held on to each other, mother and daughter, Two women who loved each other imperfectly, who'd hurt each other without meaning to, who were choosing in this kitchen on this January morning to start over. "Bring Sophie next time," Diane said. "I miss her." "I will." "And you," Diane pointed at Ethan, "you're coming too, and you're going to eat my cooking and like it." "Yes, ma'am." "And stop calling me ma'am. I'm Diane." They stayed for another hour. The tension didn't fully dissolve. Well, it wouldn't. Not for a while. But it loosened, the way a knot loosens when you stop pulling at both ends and just let it be. Maya grilled Ethan about his intentions with a directness that would have been uncomfortable if it weren't so clearly motivated by protectiveness. Diane made a second pot of coffee and put out leftover Christmas cookies that nobody really wanted, but everybody ate because that was how Diane processed emotion. She fed people. On the drive home, Lila cried. Not dramatic, heavy crying, quiet crying, the kind that leaks out of you when the thing you've been dreading is behind you and the adrenaline leaves and all that's left is the raw, scraped feeling of having been truthful in a room full of people you love. Ethan drove. He didn't say anything. He just reached over and put his hand on her knee, and she put her hand on top of his, and they drove back to the city like that. Connected, quiet, bruised but intact. The weeks that followed were not a montage. There was no musical swell, no time-lapse of cute moments, no sequence of perfectly composed scenes showing them falling effortlessly into love. What happened instead was slower, messier, and harder. The actual work of two damaged people learning how to be around each other without the safety net of pretense. They had their first fight in the third week of January. It was about something stupid. Ethan had canceled plans to go to a movie because Sophie had a fever, and he'd texted Lila about it, and Lila had texted back no worries, and Ethan had read those two words as dismissive, as code for, I'm annoyed but I'm not going to say it, because that was what Rebecca used to do. Say fine or no worries when she meant the opposite. And by the time Lila knocked on his door that evening to bring Sophie soup and a coloring book, Ethan was cold and distant and couldn't explain why. "What's wrong?" Lila asked, standing in his kitchen, holding a container of chicken noodle soup that she'd made herself. Badly, she admitted, it was oversalted, and looking genuinely confused. "Nothing. Something. You've been weird since I got here." "I'm not weird. You're giving me one-word answers. That's weird for someone who normally uses 10. He didn't say anything. He stood at the counter and stared at the soup container and felt the wall going up, the one he'd described to her on the fire escape, the one he was so good at building, and hated himself for it. "Ethan, talk to me. I don't want to be the guy whose kid always comes first and whose girlfriend always comes second. I don't want you to feel like you're in line behind a 4-year-old. Sophie should come first. I've never said otherwise." "You said no worries." "Because I meant no worries. Because your daughter is sick and a movie doesn't matter." Rebecca used to say no worries. She'd say it and then she'd punish me for it later. A look, a comment, a 3-day silence. No worries never actually meant no worries. Lila set the soup down on the counter. She looked at him for a long moment, and her expression went through something complicated. Hurt, then understanding, then a controlled steadiness that he recognized as her version of not reacting. "I'm not Rebecca," she said. "I know." "Do you? Because right now you're treating me like I am." The words landed. He felt them hit something deep and true, and he wanted to argue, wanted to defend himself, but there was nothing to defend. She was right. He was projecting. He was treating a new relationship like an old wound, applying old bandages to places that weren't bleeding. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be sorry. Be aware. There's a difference." "That's the second time someone's told me that. Then maybe it's worth remembering." She walked over to him, took the soup container, opened it, and stuck a spoon in it. "Taste this and tell me if it needs more salt." "You just said it was oversalted. I want a second opinion." He tasted it. It was indeed oversalted. "It's great," he said. Liar. "It needs work." "There it is." She smiled and he smiled and the fight ended. Not with a dramatic reconciliation, not with tears or grand gestures, but with soup and honesty, and the willingness to name the thing that was wrong instead of burying it. They had other fights, small ones mostly, The kind that couples have when they're still mapping each other's edges, still learning where the sensitive spots are, still occasionally stepping on mines they didn't know existed. Lila pushed back when he went quiet. Ethan pushed back when she deflected with humor. They stumbled. They adjusted. They stumbled again. But they kept showing up. That was the thing. Every morning, Ethan heard Lila's alarm through the wall. She hit snooze 3 times, every single morning, which drove him insane. And every evening, she knocked on his door, or he knocked on hers, and they ate dinner together, or watched something on TV, or just sat on the couch while Sophie played on the floor, and the doing of it, the daily accumulation of ordinary moments, built something between them that no grand gesture could have constructed. Sophie called her Lila for the first month, then Miss Lila for a week, after someone at daycare told her you're supposed to use titles for adults. Then, one morning in late February, while Lila was helping her put on her shoes, Sophie looked up and said, "But, Lila, are you my daddy's girlfriend?" Lila froze. Ethan, standing in the kitchen, stopped pouring his coffee. "Yes," Lila said carefully. "Is that okay with you?" Sophie thought about it. "Do you live here?" "I live next door." "But you're here every day." "I am." "Are you going to go away? Like Mommy?" The question hit the room like a truck. Ethan set down the coffee pot. Lila's hands went still on Sophie's shoes. For a few seconds, nobody moved. "No, baby," Lila said. Her voice was steady, but Ethan could see the effort it took. "I'm not going anywhere." "Promise?" "Promise." Sophie nodded, satisfied, and went back to supervising the shoe-tying process. And Lila finished and stood up and walked into the kitchen, and Ethan saw that her eyes were wet, and he pulled her into a hug without saying anything, and she pressed her face into his shirt and held on. "She asked me that," Lila said into his chest. "I know." "She's 4. She shouldn't have to ask that." "I know." "I'm going to keep that promise, Ethan. I need you to know that." "I know." And he did know. He knew it the way you know things that aren't based on evidence or logic, but on something deeper, on the accumulated weight of 100 small moments, 1,000 small choices, the daily proof of a person showing up and staying. March came. Then April. The snow melted and the city emerged from under it, gray and damp and relieved, like an animal coming out of hibernation. Ethan took Sophie to the park on the first warm Saturday, and Lila came with them, and they sat on a bench while Sophie ran herself ragged on the playground, and Ethan felt the sun on his face and realized he was happy. Not performing happy. Not fine. Actually genuinely, structurally happy. It scared him. Happiness had always felt temporary to him, a lease, not a mortgage, something that could be revoked at any time, for any reason, without notice. He'd learned to hold it loosely, to not invest too much, to keep one hand on the exit, but Lila made it hard to hold things loosely. She had a way of being fully present in conversations, in moments, in rooms, that demanded the same in return. "Stop thinking so hard," she said, nudging him with her elbow. "I'm not thinking. You have that face. The face that means you're 3 levels deep in some internal crisis." "I'm watching my daughter play." "You're watching your daughter play while having an internal crisis. I can see both." He looked at her. She was wearing sunglasses pushed up on her head and a denim jacket with a coffee stain on the sleeve, and her hair was doing something complicated in the wind, and she wasn't trying to be anything other than exactly what she was. "I talked to my mom yesterday," he said. Lila's eyebrows went up. "Your mom? In Michigan?" "She called. I actually picked up." "That's progress." "We talked for an hour. She asked about Sophie. She asked about work. Then she asked if I was seeing anyone, and I told her about you." "What did she say?" "She said, 'It's about time.' And then she got quiet, and I could hear her trying not to cry, and she said she was happy for me, and I think she actually meant it." Of course she meant it. "We're not like your family, Lila. We don't do the big dinners and the hugging and the mistletoe. We do polite phone calls and awkward silences and birthday cards that arrive 3 days late. My dad and I talk about the weather like it's a binding contract. My sister and I haven't spoken in 8 months." "Why not?" He sighed. "It's stupid. We had a disagreement about Rebecca. She thought I should have tried harder to make it work. And I thought that was none of her business, and we both dug in, and then weeks became months, and months became this big, calcified silence that neither of us knows how to break. Do you want to break it? Sometimes. Then break it. Call her. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. It's a phone call. You pick up the phone, you dial the number, you say, "Hey, it's me, I miss you. Let's stop being idiots." That's it. That's the whole thing. You make everything sound easy. Nothing is easy, but most things are simpler than we make them. We're the ones who add the complications, the pride, the grudges, the stories we tell ourselves about why we can't, the actual doing of it, the picking up the phone, the saying the words, the showing up at someone's door with pie. That part is simple. It's everything around it that's hard. Sophie ran over, breathless, her face flushed, her jacket hanging open. "Daddy, push me on the swings." Magic word? Now. That's not the magic word. Please now. He laughed and let himself be pulled toward the swings, and over his shoulder he saw Lila watching them with that expression she wore sometimes, tender, private, a little sad, and he thought about what she'd said, about simplicity, about the phone call. He called his sister that night. She picked up on the fourth ring. "Ethan?" Her voice was careful, guarded, the way voices get when too much time has passed. "Hey, Karen. Is everything okay? Is Sophie—" "Sophie's fine. Everyone's fine. I wanted to call." A long pause. He could hear a TV in the background, the sounds of her house. A house he hadn't visited in over a year, where his niece and nephew were growing up without knowing their uncle. "It's been a while," Karen said. 8 months. "I know. I'm sorry about that. I said some things that were unfair, about you not understanding, about it being none of your business. You were trying to help, and I shut you out." Another pause, longer this time. "I was wrong too," Karen said. "About Rebecca. I kept thinking if you just tried harder you could fix it, but I wasn't there. I didn't see what it was actually like. I was projecting my own stuff onto your situation, and that wasn't fair." "We both did that." "Yeah, we did." Silence, but not the calcified kind. The thawing kind. The kind that happens when two people finally stop defending their positions and just stand in the open. "I met someone," Ethan said. "You did?" "Her name is Lila. She's my neighbor. She's good, Karen. She's really good. I want to hear everything." They talked for 45 minutes. He told her about Lila, about Christmas Eve, about the pie and the mistletoe and the fire escape. He told her about Sophie's princess dress and Gerald the elephant, and the way his daughter had started smiling again. Really smiling, the kind that used her whole face. And Karen listened and laughed, and at one point her voice caught, and she said, "I'm happy for you, Ethan. I'm really, really happy." "Come visit," he said. "Bring the kids. Sophie doesn't even know her cousins." "After Easter. I'll talk to Dave." "Okay." "Ethan?" "Yeah?" "Don't wait 8 months to call again." "I won't." He hung up and sat on the couch and felt something release in his chest. A knot he'd been carrying for so long he'd forgotten it was there. It wasn't gone entirely. You don't undo 8 months of silence with one phone call, but the knot was loosening, and that was enough for now. Lila found out about the call the next morning. He told her over coffee, in his kitchen, while Sophie ate cereal at the table and Gerald supervised from his usual spot beside the juice glass. "You called her," Lila said. Not a question. "I called her." "And?" "And it went well. She's coming to visit after Easter." Lila smiled, the real one. "I'm proud of you." It was a phone call. It was more than that, and you know it. He did know it. He knew it the way he was starting to know a lot of things, quietly, gradually, through the slow accumulation of evidence that the world was less terrifying than he'd convinced himself it was. Spring turned to summer. The building's ancient air conditioning wheezed and sputtered, and Ethan bought a portable fan that sounded like a jet engine and barely moved the air. Sophie turned 5 in July. A backyard party at Diane and Frank's house with balloons and a homemade cake and too many kids running in circles on the lawn. Karen came with her family. Sophie met her cousins for the first time and immediately declared them her best friends. with the absolute confidence of a 5-year-old who didn't know that relationships were supposed to be complicated. Ethan watched from the porch, a beer in his hand, his sister beside him, his daughter screaming with joy in the sprinkler, and Lila across the yard helping Diane arrange plates on the picnic table. He watched Lila laugh at something Diane said, watched Diane swat her with a dish towel, watched the two of them fall into the easy rhythm of women who had forgiven each other and moved on. "She's good for you," Karen said. "I know." "No, I mean, you're different. You stand differently. You're not hunched anymore." "I wasn't hunched." "You were absolutely hunched. You walked around like you were bracing for impact. You don't do that anymore." He thought about that, about bracing for impact, about the walls he'd built, and the ones Lila had knocked holes in, and the ones he'd eventually dismantled himself, brick by brick, because it turned out that living behind a wall was safe, but it wasn't living. "She's not perfect," he said. "She hums in her sleep. She's a terrible cook. She hits snooze 3 times every morning, and it comes through the wall and wakes me up. She cries at commercials, not sad ones, any commercial, even the ones for car insurance. She's stubborn about the dumbest things and gives in on the things she should fight for. She's a mess." "You love her." "Yeah, I love her." It was the first time he'd said it out loud. Not to Lila. That had happened in May, on a Tuesday, over leftover pasta, in the most unromantic setting imaginable. Sophie had been in bed, and they'd been watching something neither of them was paying attention to, and Lila had said something about the show, some offhand comment, something forgettable, and he'd looked at her and said, "I love you." And she'd put down her fork and stared at him and said, "You're telling me this over reheated spaghetti?" And he'd said, "I'm telling you this because it's true." And she'd kissed him and said it back, and the spaghetti had gone cold. But saying it to Karen was different. Saying it to his sister made it real in a way that saying it in his apartment hadn't. It put it into the world. It gave it witnesses. Karen bumped her shoulder against his. "Mom's going to lose her mind." Mom already knows. She's going to lose her mind anyway. She's been waiting for this since Rebecca left. She's been waiting for this since I was born. They both laughed, and it felt good. The shared laughter of siblings who'd been apart too long and were remembering why they belonged together. The summer passed. Fall arrived, crisp and golden. The trees along their street turning yellow and red, and that particular Chicago orange that looks like the city is on fire. Sophie started kindergarten, a milestone that Ethan had been dreading for reasons he couldn't fully articulate. Something about her getting bigger, about time moving too fast, about the little girl who used to fit in the crook of his arm, now walking into a school building with a backpack almost as big as she was. Lila drove him home afterward because he was a wreck. "You're crying," she said. "I'm not crying." "You're crying in the car." "There's something in my eye." "Both eyes?" "It's a lot of something." She reached over and took his hand, and he held on, and she didn't tease him any further, which was how he knew she understood. It was October when the lease question came up. Ethan's lease was renewing in December. Lila's was up in January. The timing was either coincidental or cosmic, depending on how you looked at it. "We could find a place," Lila said one night. They were on the couch, Sophie asleep, the TV on mute, the apartment lit by the glow of the screen and the kitchen light that Ethan always left on because Sophie was afraid of total darkness. A place. Together. A place together. With more than one bathroom and walls thick enough that I can't hear your alarm at 5 in the morning. You hear my alarm? Every single morning. I hear you hit snooze. I know. We've established this. He looked at her. Are we ready for that? I don't know. Are we? I'm asking you. I'm asking you back. He was quiet for a moment. He thought about what moving in together meant. Not just the logistics, the packing and the lease signing and the furniture negotiations, but the commitment of it, the vulnerability. The removal of the wall between their apartments, which had been both barrier and safety net, the thing that separated them and the thing that connected them, the surface they'd pressed their palms against in the dark. Sophie would need her own room, he said. Obviously. And we'd need space for Gerald and Rabbit. They have a whole situation going on. I was thinking a 2-bedroom, maybe 3 if we can swing it. Something with a yard, even a small one, for the future dog. The future dog? Sophie and I have discussed it extensively. Gerald is also on board. Gerald is a stuffed elephant. Gerald has opinions. He laughed. She laughed. And somewhere in the laughter, the decision was made, but not formally, not dramatically, but the way most real decisions get made. Gradually, and then all at once. Through 100 small conversations and 1,000 small moments, until the thing you're deciding has already happened, and you're just catching up to it. They found a place in November, a 2-bedroom apartment in Logan Square. First floor, with a tiny backyard that was more weeds than grass, and a kitchen twice the size of either of their old ones. It wasn't fancy. The floors creaked and the bathroom was small, and one of the bedroom doors stuck when it rained. But it had space. Space for Sophie's toys and Lila's books and Ethan's drafting table. Space for a table big enough to seat guests. Space for the life they were building, unevenly and imperfectly, out of the raw material of who they were. They moved in on a Saturday in December. Frank showed up with his truck and his bad knee and his opinions about how boxes should be stacked. Diane brought food, of course she brought food, enough for the movers and the neighbors, and probably the entire block. Karen flew in from Michigan with her husband and kids, and Sophie led her cousins through the empty rooms like a tour guide showing off a cathedral. Maya brought wine and sarcasm and a housewarming gift. A framed photo of the mistletoe from her parents' house with a handwritten note that said, "Where it all started. M." Lila hung it in the hallway. That first night, after everyone had gone and the boxes were stacked in towers and the kitchen was barely functional and Sophie was asleep in her new room, a room she'd chosen herself, the one with the window facing the backyard, Ethan and Lila stood in their living room, surrounded by the chaos of 2 lives merging, and looked at each other. "We live here," Lila said. "We live here. Together. Together. No wall between us. No wall." She looked around the room. The boxes, the bare walls, the single lamp they'd managed to unearth, casting everything in a dim, amber glow that made the mess look almost intentional. "It's not much," she said. "It's everything." She looked at him. He looked at her. And the space between them, which had once been a hallway, then a fire escape, then a car ride, then a kitchen, then a couch, then nothing at all, held only the quiet hum of a building settling around its new occupants. "You know what I keep thinking about?" Ethan said. "What?" "That night, Christmas Eve, you standing at my door with pie and a reindeer sweater and the worst idea I'd ever heard. It wasn't the worst idea. It was objectively the worst idea. It worked, though. That's not the point. That's exactly the point." He shook his head. "The point is, you knocked. That's the whole story. Everything that came after, the party, the lie, Trevor, the mistletoe, the fire escape, the fights, the soup, the phone call to my sister, Sophie's birthday, this apartment, all of it started because you knocked on a stranger's door on Christmas Eve. You weren't a stranger. You were my neighbor. I was basically a stranger. Fine. I knocked on a stranger's door, and the stranger opened it, and the stranger said yes. The stranger was eating Salisbury steak. The stranger was desperate. The stranger was lonely. We were both lonely." She stepped closer to him. "That's the thing, right? That's the whole thing. 2 lonely people who happened to live on the other side of the same wall, and one of them was just brave enough, or scared enough, or desperate enough to knock." Ethan put his arms around her. She put hers around him. They stood in their living room, in their apartment, in their life, and held each other the way people hold things they've earned, tightly, gratefully, with full knowledge of how easily it could have been otherwise. "I love you," he said. He said it into her hair, the way he always did, because something about the closeness of it, the muffled intimacy, made the words feel more true. "I love you too. Even though I wake up at 5. Even though you wake up at 5. Even though you forget to buy milk. Even though you still can't wrap a present to save your life. I'm getting better. You're not, but I've accepted it." He laughed against her hair, and she laughed against his chest, and in the other room Sophie made a sound in her sleep, a murmur, a sigh, the soft noise of a child dreaming in a house where she was safe. The story doesn't end neatly. Real ones never do. There were still hard days. Mornings when Ethan's old anxieties surfaced like weather. Evenings when Lila went quiet and needed to be alone with whatever she was carrying. Sophie had nightmares sometimes. The dog they eventually adopted, a golden retriever named Biscuit, because Sophie named him and Sophie was not negotiable on the matter, chewed through 2 pairs of Ethan's shoes in the first week. Rebecca called on Sundays sometimes, and those calls still left a complicated residue that took hours to metabolize. Frank's Mustang was never finished. Diane still pushed, though more gently now. Maya still interrogated every major life decision with the clinical precision of someone who would one day be a very intimidating therapist. But here is what is also true. On Christmas Eve, 1 year after the knock, Ethan Brooks sat at a table in a house in Naperville, surrounded by people who knew the real story, the lie that started it, the truth that grew from it. And he looked down the table at Lila, who was arguing with Maya about something ridiculous, and at Sophie, who was showing Gerald to Karen's kids with the seriousness of a museum curator, and at Diane, who was already bringing out the first of what would be 7 dishes, and at Frank, who caught Ethan's eye and gave him that single nod, the one that meant everything. And he felt it. Not happiness. Something sturdier than that. Something with weight and foundation and load-bearing capacity built to hold the full measure of a life. The good parts and the hard parts, the noise and the silence, the fighting and the forgiving and the daily, ordinary, extraordinary work of loving people who are just as broken and scared and brave as you are. He felt home. Not the apartment, not the house, not the walls or the roof or the fire escape where 2 freezing people had chosen each other in the dark. Home was the knock. It had always been the knock. That single, terrifying, ridiculous act of reaching across the distance between 2 closed doors and saying, "I see you. You're not alone. Come with me." Everything else, every fight, every kiss, every overcooked soup and slammed door and whispered goodnight through 3 inches of plaster, was just what happened after someone was brave enough to reach out and someone else was brave enough to let them in. And in the kitchen, Diane was singing off-key, and Frank was opening the good wine, and Sophie was laughing, that full-body, whole-face, throw-your-head-back laugh. And Lila looked across the table at Ethan and smiled the real smile, the small one, the one that was only for him. He smiled back. The radiator in their old building was probably still clanging, but Ethan Brooks couldn't hear it anymore. He was too busy listening to the sound of his life, messy, imperfect, loud, and full, happening all around him.